A stinging slap brings the boy back to consciousness. His father's eyes burn with absolute disgust, calling him the ultimate stain on their noble bloodline. But little did this arrogant patriarch know, this so-called trash, Yurian, possessed the legendary talent to master any martial art in existence. Meanwhile, in the frozen northern borders of the Crisis Kingdom, a massive undead legion marches forward. Duke Elian watches in pure terror, his voice trembling as he denies reality. Rotting corpses claw their way out of the frozen earth, lumbering toward the living. The Duke curses his fate. The undead horde stretches beyond the horizon, dragging a suffocating, nightmare-inducing poisonous mist in their wake. Panic spreads through the ranks as a Damso. Terrified soldier points to the sky. The Duke's blood runs completely cold, standing ominously among the horde. Is the legendary Death Knight Dullahan, a monster of pure despair. Even if the 10 highest-ranking Aura Knights joined forces, survival against this beast would be a miracle. The Duke grates his teeth, declaring that with their monarch's end, broken morale and exhausted troops, victory is absolutely impossible. They need to fall back and regroup. But Duke Elian shakes his head in despair. The defensive walls are already crumbling. If this northern gate falls, the entire kingdom will be drowned in a sea of blood, even if every single soldier must lay down their life today. They must hold the line. But suddenly, a fierce wind violently tears through the battlefield. A lone figure blurs past the vanguard, his crimson cape fluttering like a blood-red banner. The Duke shouts in furious disbelief. Who dares to charge into this slaughter so recklessly? But a veteran soldier's eyes widen as he recognizes the fearless warrior. It is their lone reinforcement from the Southern Rocks family, the eccentric master who exclusively wields twin daggers. The soldier screams out a desperate warning. His opponent is the invincible Death Knight. A tiny blade couldn't possibly pierce that demonic armor, but in the blink of an eye, the dagger violently plunges into the undead abomination. The holy steel slices through rotting flesh like warm butter. The Duke is left completely speechless. Did the terrifying Death Knight just get pushed back? It defies all logic and reason. Without hesitating for a single second, Yurian unleashes a storm of daggers. Each blade moves with lethal precision, piercing the walking corpses and causing them to instantly dissolve into ash. One strike, one annihilation. The soldiers fall to their knees, wondering if the heavens themselves have sent a divine saint to save them. But the young master merely scoffs at their dramatic awe. To him, it was just basic cultivation. He simply absorbed all the pure spiritual energy into his own core. Let us rewind the clock. 6 months earlier, the protagonist jolts awake with a massive gasp. His vision is blurry as a mysterious figure approaches his bed. He slowly lifts his heavy head. Standing before him is an absolute masterpiece of a woman, but her attire screams of a fantasy world, and a deadly steel blade rests at her hip. The fierce beauty glares down at him. She coldly asks if the young master has finally regained his senses, threatening to drag the high priest back into the room. Desperate for answers, he weakly reaches out his hand to stop her. He needs to know what on earth is happening, but the mysterious swordswoman vanishes without a second glance. Dragging his unusually heavy body out of the luxurious bed, he stumbles around in complete confusion. Suddenly, his reflection in a full-length mirror stops him dead in his tracks. Where are his sharp, handsome features? Staring back at him is a shockingly overweight and pathetic-looking noble brat. His mind completely short-circuits. Trembling with absolute denial, he tries to convince himself this is just a terrifying nightmare. If he just goes back to sleep, surely he will wake up in his own reality. Suddenly, an old priest steps into the chamber, announcing the young master's recovery, but right behind him storms an intimidating nobleman, roaring like a furious beast. He violently curses the boy, furious that the ultimate disgrace of their proud bloodline has dared to open his eyes. The holy priest desperately steps in, begging the Lord to delay the inevitable punishment. The imposing man clicks his tongue in sheer disgust. The priest quietly notes a bizarre miracle. Despite being beaten to a bloody pulp, the boy's spiritual core has somehow stabilized. His physical wounds are already regenerating. It is a divine blessing. But the furious Lord completely erupts. He screams that death would have been a better fate for a degenerate who dared to lay hands on his own fiancée. He is nothing but a filthy beast. At 19 years of age, he should be a pillar of the family. Instead, even his younger brother has brilliantly awakened his martial aura. Yet the eldest son remains a pathetic, bloated waste of space without a single drop of mana. The protagonist mutters these words in absolute disbelief. The patriarch turns his back with a chilling glare. He issues a strict ultimatum. The moment this trash can walk, he must crawl to his fiancée and beg for his worthless life. His mind races. Who is he supposed to beg? His father violently barks the name. The devastatingly beautiful Ilya. If she denies him mercy, his punishment will be infinitely worse. He demands a response, and the overwhelmed protagonist weakly nods. The patriarch's shoulders slump in heavy defeat, lamenting the cruel fate of having such a useless heir. He orders the boy to stop dragging their legendary house through the mud. A chilling realization strikes the transmigrator. If this angry man is his father, then he must be the infamous Wellington Rocks. The terrifying patriarch flinches in absolute shock. How dare this useless brat utter his father's full name? A thunderous slap echoes through the lavish room, sending the boy crashing back down. The heavy beating continues without an ounce of mercy. The poor priest throws himself in front of the raging lord, desperately praying for a ceasefire. Pain explodes across the protagonist's face. This cannot be real. It has to be a twisted illusion. After blacking out from the brutal punishment, he finally gasps for air, his body soaked in cold sweat. Why hasn't he returned to the modern world? The fierce swordswoman steps out of the shadows, asking if the young master is done playing dead. He stares at her in sheer panic and instinctively calls out the name. Aaron. The cold knight tilts her head, completely bewildered by his erratic behavior. Why is her arrogant master acting like a scared rabbit? He frantically pieces the terrifying puzzle together. Was he beaten into a coma because he dared to touch the untouchable Ilya? Aaron sharply nods, but narrows her fierce eyes at his bizarrely polite tone. The transmigrator swallows hard, the bitter taste of reality sinking in. Did he seriously just take a brutal beating from his own fiancée? The knight crosses her arms with a look of utter disgust. To be perfectly accurate, he attempted to assault the lady of the house, and she mercilessly beat him within an inch of his pathetic life. A soul-crushing realization hits him like a freight train. He rips his hair out in absolute despair, screaming that his life is completely over. The cold swordswoman watches him lose his mind. The puzzle pieces flawlessly connect. He hasn't just crossed into a random fantasy world. He has transmigrated into his very own web novel. But heaven played a cruel joke. He wasn't the overpowered main character. He had possessed the body of the ultimate trash villain, the disgusting noble who gets humiliated by the true protagonist and suffers a gruesome death. This tragic fate is absolutely unacceptable. He refuses to die like a dog, Aaron cautiously calls out to her spiraling master, but he continues to scream about web novels and bad writing, leaving the fierce knight completely baffled by these alien words. What a complete joke. Yurian stared at his new reality, realizing the body he possessed was absolute trash. Zero talent, zero skills, zero effort. A pathetic noble living only present-signed to leech off his family's legendary prestige. In the original story, this fool lost his fiancée to the main character, attempted a cowardly ambush for revenge, and instead suffered a humiliating defeat. His fate? Dying pathetically in some nameless, dark alleyway. Now trapped in this doomed flesh, Yurian gritted his teeth, wondering how he would ever survive the brutal storms of this fantasy world. He had zero muscle memory and absolutely no clue about this overweight vessel's hidden limits. But he possessed the ultimate weapon, knowledge. He knew exactly where the fated encounters and god-tier items were hidden before the main character could claim them. With his mind racing, he bolted upright in bed, determined to prepare for the looming crisis, or at least, he tried to. His massive, unconditioned body violently betrayed him, throwing off his center of gravity. Aaron, his loyal knight, rushed to his side. "Young master, are you unwell?" "I feel like absolute death," Yurian groaned. But then, his eyes widened at a sudden floating phenomenon. "You must rest, my lord," she pleaded softly. Yurian froze. It wasn't there a second ago. The strange distortion that made him frown earlier had fully materialized. A glowing system screen hovered right beside Aaron. His jaw dropped as golden text revealed her hidden talents: swift sword, clear mind, mirror, and aura. "Adaptation. Young master?" Aaron called out again, her voice laced with worry. Yurian quickly snapped out of his trance. "It is nothing. My mind was just playing tricks on me. I am perfectly fine now. Return to your duties," he commanded gently. Aaron bowed gracefully and turned to leave, but Yurian's gaze remained locked firmly on her retreating back. Swift sword. He remembered the lore. Aaron was destined to be a monstrous powerhouse, far surpassing any ordinary knight of the realm. But what truly shocked him was the bright red text below. Affinity, 0. A cold sweat broke out on his neck. Is this some kind of twisted dating simulator? Did the system glitch because I played too many romance games in my past life? This bizarre fusion of game mechanics and fantasy reality was breaking his mind. He paused to calculate. Given how disgustingly the original Yurian treated everyone, a neutral zero affinity was actually a miracle. But that wasn't the most crucial revelation. Staring at his heavy reflection in the mirror, he waited with bated breath. Flash! Yes, he roared triumphantly, as his own magnificent status screen illuminated the dark room. His passive abilities were legendary, the Eye of Creation, and the Four Heavens of the Tang Clan. He expected some basic fantasy perks, but the Tang Clan's supreme martial arts? That was straight out of the legendary Wuxia webtoon he used to obsess over. He had only read it for the breathtakingly beautiful heroine, but he knew the lore perfectly. The Sichuan Tang Clan, absolute masters of lethal poisons and silent, hidden weaponry. The world-building of this reality was a chaotic fusion of magic and martial arts, but his blood boiled with excitement. If he could master the Four Heavens technique, his survival in this brutal world was absolutely guaranteed. This wasn't just any skill. It was the absolute pinnacle technique from the most feared orthodox sect in the martial world, a legacy of devastating toxins and shadows, built perfectly for silent, untraceable assassination. Why does a medieval knight's world have Eastern martial arts? He muttered. It didn't matter. The heavens had handed him the ultimate cheat code to awaken his hidden power. Meanwhile, Lord Wellington marched down the grand corridor. My lord, Erin bowed deeply as she approached. Has my foolish son finally awakened? The imposing duke demanded. Yes, my lord, she confirmed softly. Wellington's eyes narrowed. And his condition? He is still struggling, my lord. He collapsed just trying to stand, Erin reported, her voice perfectly neutral. His overall vitality remains terribly weak. Wellington scoffed coldly. The high priest assured me his wounds were shallow. Yet, the boy was acting bizarrely today. In the past, if I demanded he beg Ilya for forgiveness, he would have torn the manor apart in a blind, childish rage. But today, he merely bowed his head and accepted it in complete silence. He sighed heavily. Trash doesn't change overnight. He was likely just in shock. By tomorrow, he will surely erupt, screaming for bloody revenge against Ilya. The young master simply needs time to heal, Erin offered dutifully. Wellington turned his back on her, his face twisted in bitter disgust. Do not waste your pity, knight. Even I, his own flesh and blood, have completely abandoned hope for him. As the duke walked away, he secretly felt a pang of guilt for binding such a brilliant prodigy to his worthless son. How torturous must it be for a true knight to serve a pig? But Erin stood silently in the hall, her sharp intuition tingling. No, the young master's aura had fundamentally shifted today. It was a subtle, unexplainable transformation. Just moments before, she had questioned him in utter disbelief. What did you just say, young master? Yurian had simply looked her in the eyes. I am going to exercise. Lead the way to the training grounds. Erin had frozen, unable to process the words. You wish to undergo physical training? Right now? Yurian's expression remained unshaken. Is there a problem with that? The truth was, his Eye of Creation granted him absolute vision over stats, but the profound martial arts of the Sichuan Tang clan remained hopelessly locked away. The vessel was simply too weak to contain such divine energy. His cursed, obese body was restricting his destiny. Until he unsealed the power, intense physical conditioning was his only path forward. Gasping for air, Yurian cursed his ancestors. The duke's estate was astronomically massive, easily the size of 3 grand stadiums. His lungs were already screaming for mercy. If he stayed locked in his lavish bedroom, the temptation of the soft mattress would surely defeat him. To forge a new destiny, he had to break the chains of his comfortable, pathetic lifestyle. As he waddled through the grand halls, the servants shot him, barely concealed glares of absolute disgust. But remembering the vile atrocities the original owner committed, Yurian swallowed his pride and accepted their silent judgment. They trudged onward, sweat dripping down his chin. Are we at the gates yet? He wheezed. We have arrived, my lord, Erin announced. This was the desolate third training ground. The elite knights exclusively trained at the first 2, avoiding this isolated area. As Yurian wiped his brow, a looming shadow blocked his path. His Eye of Creation flared to life. Danger, affinity, -91. The crimson text screamed of pure, murderous intent. One wrong move, and this man would gladly bury him in a shallow grave. It was Commander Rhea. Well, Rhea sneered, his hand resting on his pommel. To what do I owe the absolute displeasure of your presence, young master? Yurian's blood ran cold as the memories clicked. Rhea unleashed a mocking, terrifying laugh. I am truly honored that a piece of trash like you remembers my name. Yurian swallowed hard, his eyes dropping to the lethal steel at the knight's waist. Panic spiked through his veins. Aaron, he barked out desperately, his voice cracking under the crushing pressure. Exactly what had transpired between them. Aaron tilted her head, asking if his memories were still blurry. Years ago, when the Marquis had dragged him to the training grounds, the furious young master had thrown a massive tantrum. He had severely insulted Rhea by calling him a mere squire. In response, Rhea simply laughed, his sword aura blazing with terrifying precision. After that, the Marquis gave up on the boy's martial arts journey entirely. Yurian had screamed that cultivation was a hopeless path. Rhea had merely glanced at him with icy disdain, silently judging. This pathetic excuse for a noble. But now, the young master needed to escape those judging eyes. He desperately wanted to know if there was an isolated training hall, wishing to cultivate his secret techniques in absolute solitude. Aaron mentioned the fourth hall, warning him that it was located at the desolate edge of the estate. The equipment there was completely worn out, ensuring it remained abandoned. Yurian's eyes sparkled with ambition. It was the perfect sanctuary. He declared they must head there immediately. If he was going to shed this mortal fat and forge a new body, he needed uninterrupted focus. The loyal knight nodded, leading the way through the winding paths. As the heavy, rusted doors of the fourth hall groaned open, Yurian was already gasping for breath just from the long walk. His gaze fell upon a dusty weapon rack. If he was going to master the legendary hidden weapons of the Sichuan Tang Clan, he needed to start with the absolute basics. Throwing daggers. His eyes locked onto the wooden targets, standing like silent enemies across the room. Yurian carefully aimed at the center mark, raising the cold steel to eye level. Channeling whatever pitiful life force his body possessed, he whipped his arm forward and unleashed the blade. Clang! The dagger pitifully bounced off the stone floor, failing spectacularly to even graze the target. He cursed under his breath, utterly frustrated. He truly thought his sheer willpower could force the system's skill to unlock. Suddenly, he felt Aaron's piercing gaze boring into his back. Panicking, he coughed awkwardly, claiming he was just testing the blade's balance. He declared he must build his foundational stamina before attempting advanced martial arts. He immediately began jogging laps around the cavernous hall. Claiming he needed to enter closed-door meditation, he ordered Aaron to wait outside and do as she pleased. Meanwhile, Marquis Wellington listened to the latest reports in utter disbelief. The notoriously lazy young master had practically moved into the training grounds, sweating blood and tears. It was a bizarre anomaly, and the Marquis cynically wondered how soon the boy's fragile resolve would shatter. 3 grueling weeks flashed by, and the Lord received shocking news. For 21 straight days, the young master hadn't stopped cultivating. He had shed a massive amount of weight, and his physical aura had completely transformed. Beneath those layers of fat lay the sharp, striking features of a true martial genius. The Marquis stroked his chin, wondering if the heavens had finally awakened his son's mind. Back in the desolate training hall, the young master admired his newly defined jawline. But despite his intense physical transformation, the legendary Sichuan Tang Clan's hidden weapon arts remained stubbornly locked within the system. He gritted his teeth. He would give it 1 full month. If the heavens denied him, he would resort to stealing the original protagonist's divine encounters. Just then, Aaron's voice echoed through the hall, announcing the arrival of his evening rations. The young master nodded in deep appreciation until his eyes fell upon the bowl. It was the infamous Shireen broth, a dark, medicinal sludge packed with potent spiritual herbs, designed specifically to burn impurities and temper the muscles. Yurian scowled, complaining bitterly about the disgusting flavor. Aaron raised an eyebrow, asking if his martial resolve was already crumbling over a mere meal. The protagonist sighed heavily, pointing out he had consumed nothing but this bitter elixir for 3 entire weeks. The female knight's expression turned deadly serious as she addressed her lord. Her voice cut through the air like a blade. Did he merely want to shed some vanity weight, or did he truly wish to walk the supreme path of a knight? Yurian's eyes burned with newfound determination as he declared his absolute ambition. Hearing this, Aaron sternly reminded him that in this unforgiving territory, even the almighty Marquis consumed this very same medicinal broth after his brutal cultivation sessions. So the young master needed to swallow his pride. He must empty the bowl. Without another word. Defeated by her unyielding logic, Yurian grabbed the spoon. He muttered about the harsh realities of this fantasy world, questioning what kind of sadistic, ancient tradition forced cultivators to drink something that tasted like muddy grass. But the results spoke for themselves. The elixir was actively refining his mortal body. He forcefully scooped up a generous portion and shoved it into his mouth. Suddenly, Yurian froze. Something was terribly wrong. The flavor profile. Because today, the medicinal broth tasted incredibly sharp and metallic. Ding! A translucent blue system window violently materialized before his eyes. Red warning letters flashed, declaring he had just ingested lethal poison. But before panic could completely set in, a golden notification erupted across his vision. The host had successfully satisfied the hidden, heavenly conditions. The legendary poison arts of the Sichuan Tang Clan had officially awakened. The notification chimed melodiously, leaving the protagonist staring at the floating text in utter disbelief. Meanwhile, inside the grand study, the Marquis heard a soft rap at his heavy oak door. He commanded the visitor to enter. It was his second wife, gracefully stepping in with a tray of fragrant spiritual tea. Lady Ka's sharp eyes noticed his distant expression, and she softly asked what profound thoughts were occupying his grand mind. Marquis Wellington smiled tiredly, claiming he was simply admiring the pristine beauty of the courtyard gardens. Lady Ka's lips curled into a sweet smile. She proudly stated she had been cultivating the spiritual flora herself, pouring her heart into every single petal. The Lord praised her impeccable taste and devotion, but the tender moment suddenly shifted. Her delicate hands rested on his shoulders, and her voice dropped to a whisper, questioning when he would officially declare her son, Colin, as the true heir to the family's legacy. After all, the secret promises had already been made in the shadows. It would be extremely wise to formalize the succession before any unforeseen variables appeared. Wellington subtly stiffened, gently removing her hands from his shoulders. He sighed, warning his ambitious wife that the official decree would take a little more time. A flash of impatience crossed Kay's beautiful features. She demanded to know the reason for this delay, reminding him of his solemn oath from the previous moon. The Lord nodded heavily, but surely she had heard the whispers as, well, a miraculous change had occurred. The formerly trash-like eldest son had finally awakened his martial spirit. The blood of House Rocks flowed first in his veins. If he truly proved his worth on the arduous path of cultivation, destiny dictated he must be the rightful successor. Ka's smile tightened, a dangerous glint in her eyes. She admitted the rumors of his manic training had reached her ears. She played the part of a concerned mother perfectly, claiming she was deeply worried for his health, but expressed profound relief that the boy's shattered mind had finally healed. The Marquis let out a low, ironic chuckle. It was incredibly amusing to think that getting utterly humiliated and beaten by his own fiancée was the spark needed to ignite his martial aura. But Ka's gentle mask slipped for just a fraction of a second. What exactly was his absolute plan for the seat of ultimate power? The Lord's gaze turned as cold as northern ice. He declared that 3 weeks of swinging a sword meant nothing in the grand scheme of immortality. He would observe the boy from the shadows for a little longer. But his voice carried the weight of an absolute vow. If his eldest son strayed from the martial path and reverted to a pathetic waste of space, he would strip him of his birthright instantly, granting the title of heir to Colin without hesitation. Satisfied with this blood-bound promise, Lady Ka bowed gracefully. She excused herself to her private chambers, urging her lord not to exhaust his vital energy. As the heavy doors clicked shut, finally leaving the Duke's, shadows danced across her room as she bit her lip, blood welling from sheer fury. "Just you wait, Yurian," she hissed into the dark. Meanwhile, back in his own chambers, young Master stared in absolute awe. A legendary skill had just unlocked. The infamous Sichuan Tang Clan, absolute masters of deadly toxins, demanded a heavy price for their power. The condition? Consuming lethal poison itself. His eyes locked onto the glowing system window, hovering above his seemingly innocent soup. A suspicious icon pulsated above the broth. Focusing his intent, he willed the interface to expand. As the holographic text scrolled downward, the sinister truth was revealed. The infamous Hyengang herb, a vicious toxin designed to paralyze a cultivator's energy network. Instead of fear, a feral grin spread across his face, leaving his bodyguard, Aaron, utterly bewildered. "Young master, is something wrong with the meal?" she asked. Yurian simply chuckled. "Not at all," he replied smoothly, raising a generous spoonful of the deadly broth to his lips. As the warm liquid slid down his throat, his mind raced with cold calculations. Who had dared to slip poison into his food? The original villain he inhabited was notoriously resistant to such pathetic tricks. The butterfly effect was already distorting the original plot. A sudden realization struck him like lightning. A major turning point in the timeline was missing. The image of his cold-hearted father and his brilliant half-brother, Colin, flashed through his mind. By this point in the novel, the patriarch should have officially declared Colin the family heir. Was this delay caused by his own sudden dedication to martial arts? If so, this assassination attempt undoubtedly traced back to Colin's desperate faction. Swallowing the final drop of the venomous stew, a crisp chime echoed in his head. A brilliant blue system window shattered the silence, displaying a critical warning. The conditions for minor paralysis poison had been successfully met. Wiping his mouth with unnatural calm, the young master smiled. "That was a truly divine meal," he declared. "So delicious, it practically brings tears to my eyes." Aaron stood frozen in shock at his bizarre behavior. Yurian calmly requested some time alone to meditate. Without a single word of protest, the loyal female bodyguard bowed her head in obedience. "Please rest well, young master. I will attend to you at dawn," she said softly. After wishing her a good night, he waited until the heavy wooden door clicked shut. Instantly, his demeanor shifted. Staring into the mirror, a predatory gleam sparked in his eyes. It was time to unlock the legendary power of the Sichuan Tang Clan. "Activate the Creator's Eye," he commanded. The world around him warped as his status window flared to life. His host synchronization rate had dipped to 97%. Yurian marveled at the sleek, magical interface. "Incredible system design," he muttered, focusing his spiritual intent on the golden plus icons. A branching skill tree materialized. He had officially gained access to poison arts, martial arts, and hidden weapon techniques. His heart raced with anticipation as he opened the poison tab first. Currently, only the minor paralysis ability was active. However, a glaring problem blocked his path. He possessed absolutely no internal energy technique to fuel it. Scanning through the vast catalog of deadly toxins, he scrolled to the very bottom of the skill tree. His breath hitched. The ultimate tier of the poison path offered something heaven-defying: absolute invisibility. But this leveling system was ruthlessly strict. He had to master the foundation before reaching the peak. To even utilize the most basic paralyzing mist, he desperately needed a cultivation method. It made perfect sense within the lore of this world. The fearsome Tang Clan always utilized their deep internal qi to safely store and refine lethal toxins within their own bodies. Shifting his gaze, he cracked open the martial arts menu. 3 legendary techniques awaited his choice: the black poison arts, the thunder needle style, and finally, the divine energy of 10,000 poisons. For a hardcore Wuxia fanatic like Yurian, the choice was blatantly obvious. The black poison arts offered mere toxic mastery. The thunder needle style only enhanced throwing weapons. But the divine energy of 10,000 poisons? It was a notoriously difficult cultivation method that demanded immense patience and time. Yet, the rewards were world-shaking. It promised to seamlessly fuse and amplify both his poison arts and his hidden weapon lethality. Without a second thought, he selected the divine technique. Instantly, a torrential flood of system energy crashed into his soul. Yurian gasped as profound enlightenment washed over him. The ancient, mystic mantras of the technique were forcefully carved directly into his consciousness. He couldn't waste a single second. He had to circulate this newfound qi immediately. Stripping off his silk shirt, he sat in the lotus position on his bed, desperately gathering raw, atmospheric energy into his dantian. A mysterious, burning current suddenly ignited within his mortal vessel. This was it. True, unadulterated qi. Carefully, he guided the raging power through his blocked meridians, depositing it safely into his dantian to forge his internal foundation. When the first rays of morning light pierced the room, the young master finally broke out of his deep meditation. This is absolute heaven-defying magic," he breathed in awe. The classic cultivation novels hadn't lied. Cultivating throughout the entire night had completely replaced his mortal need for sleep. This was his new reality, and he felt invincible. A boundless, terrifying vitality surged through his veins. He could literally sense the spiritual qi flowing in the air. His heightened awareness allowed him to count every single sparrow resting on his windowsill without even opening his eyes. A profound, radiating heat settled comfortably deep within his dantian. Testing his new limits, he willed the system interface to open purely with his mind. A golden screen flickered, proudly displaying his advancement. 1 star in the divine energy technique. Suddenly, his sharp senses picked up a familiar presence approaching the corridor. He locked his gaze on the heavy oak door just as Aaron pushed it open. Young master, it is time to wake, she began, freezing mid-sentence. Seeing him sitting perfectly upright, radiating power, she realized he hadn't slept a wink. I found myself lost in profound meditation, Yurian explained, with a serene smile. Frowning in concern, his loyal guard insisted that skipping sleep would severely hinder his martial arts training for the day. The young master merely scoffed, jumping to his feet with explosive agility. Nonsense. My condition has never been better. Overflowing with pure chi, he felt an overwhelming urge to test his newfound limits on the training grounds. Seeing his unyielding resolve, Erin bowed and took her leave to arrange a hearty morning meal. Stepping into the hallway, a slight blush crept up her cheeks as she wondered when her frail master had developed such defined, chiseled muscles. Moments later, standing beneath the morning sun at the training pavilion, Yurian approached an array of deadly throwing daggers. Let's see if the legends are true, he whispered to the wind. Gripping the cold steel of a blade, he took a practiced stance. But just as he cocked his arm back, a startling phenomenon occurred. A glowing, neon crosshair materialized right in his field of vision. It was exactly like the aiming reticle from a first-person shooter game. Guided by the system's absolute precision, he locked onto the distant wooden dummy. His body moved with blinding, fluid speed. Erin watched from the sidelines, her breath caught in her throat. Yurian unleashed the blade. It pierced the air with a vicious whistle, sinking dead center into the target as a burst of toxic purple aura exploded outward. I actually did it, he cheered, leaving his seasoned bodyguard absolutely stunned. He had flawlessly awakened the system's lethal hidden weapon arts. Overcome with shock and awe, Erin could only call out to her transformed young master. Master? What in the heavens was that? She stammered, questioning the impossible feat she had just witnessed. Yer simply shrugged. He played it cool, claiming he had no idea either, suggesting that perhaps the grueling training from the past month was finally bearing fruit. But Erin wasn't buying it. There is absolutely no way, she cried out. Her entire worldview was shattering as she stood there, utterly paralyzed by shock. Yer chuckled inwardly. It was his very first time seeing his usually stoic guard looking so bewildered. Intrigued, he wondered if he should push the limits even further. He grasped the cold steel of another dagger. As he focused his mind, a profound realization washed over him. Whenever he locked onto a target, a boundless torrent of internal energy surged violently from his dantian. The raw power thrumming through his veins was intoxicating. This time, the strike would be devastatingly faster and infinitely stronger. With a flick of his wrist, the blade tore through the air like a silver flash of lightning and obliterated the target completely. Wooden splinters rained down like confetti. Erin's jaw practically hit the floor, her mind completely short-circuiting at the sheer devastation. Meanwhile, a sly, knowing smile spread across Yur's face. Having flawless accuracy like this felt illegal. It was basically an absolute aimbot from a video game brought into reality. Believe it or not, in his past life, he was an absolute legend at a first-person shooter called Battle Attack. He had even crushed the competition to win a massive internet cafe tournament back in the day. But to Erin, this was terrifyingly real. Shaking off her stupor, she desperately demanded to know what kind of monstrous martial art that was. Instead of answering, Yur turned to her with an intense gaze. He asked if she could sense anything entirely different about his aura. The flustered guard blinked in confusion, dodging the real question. She admitted that, well, yes, he had certainly lost a noticeable amount of weight compared to yesterday. But as for his aura, she could not sense a single thing. Yur raised an eyebrow at the weight loss comment. Erin nodded firmly, pointing out that his relentless daily training and forced consumption of the medicinal broth were finally refining his physique. But today, the transformation was far too drastic to ignore. Yur furrowed his brows in deep thought. The realization hit him like a bolt of lightning. She genuinely could not feel the monstrous ocean of chi practically overflowing from his body. The truth was staggering. In this entire cultivation world, he was the absolute anomaly. He was the only one who could wield this ancient internal energy. And to everyone else, his power was completely invisible. He had basically unlocked a god-tier stealth build. A dark chuckle escaped his lips as he wondered just how far he could push this heaven-defying advantage. Thwack, thwack. 2 more daggers buried themselves into the bullseye with terrifying, effortless precision. Smirking, he announced that it was time to kick things up a notch. He launched a blade with such divine accuracy that it flawlessly split the hilt of the previous dagger right down the middle. Absolute perfection, he declared, leaving his poor guard speechless once again. Refusing to be outdone, Erin stubbornly asked if she could give it a shot. She grabbed a dagger, took a deep breath, and channeled all her focus. With a fierce cry, she threw it with every ounce of her strength. But reality was cruel. The blade pathetically missed, tumbling into the dirt before even reaching the target. Yer teased that even the Great Guard had limits to her talents, making the humiliated girl flush bright red with sheer frustration. But just as he was laughing, Yer's eyes widened in sudden disbelief. A glowing, translucent system window had manifested directly above Erin's head. The system revealed a newly registered martial art, the direct/skill. Yer's mind raced. The golden text indicated that this divine technique could be executed using absolutely any weapon in existence. Eager to verify this cheat-like ability, he announced he would test it himself, leaving Erin completely bewildered and annoyed at her own failure. He looked down, wondering if this pathetic item would actually work. He ordered Erin to step back, warning her that things might get dangerous. She stared at him in utter disbelief, questioning the piece of garbage he casually held in his grip. It was nothing but a splintered, broken wooden sword. Yet, as Yer raised the ruined blade to the heavens, a torrential flood of internal energy erupted from his dantian, surging violently through his meridians and straight into his arms. With a roaring battle cry, he unleashed the direct slash. A terrifying shockwave exploded outwards, and that fragile, wooden sword shot out like a cannonball, completely obliterating the target and shattering the very earth behind it into a crater. Erin gasped, her eyes trembling with absolute reverence, as she desperately asked what kind of heaven-shaking power that was. Desperate to uncover the depths of her young master's hidden strength, she pressed for answers. But Yer simply played the fool, brushing it off by saying he wasn't quite sure, and that maybe it was just a lucky result of his recent practice. His loyal bodyguard shot him a deadpan look, boldly stating that such explosive destruction could never be the result of mere basic training. The young master's gaze suddenly grew sharp. He casually revealed that he already knew she had been secretly reporting his training progress to the family head, and because of that, he had one absolute condition. He ordered her to bury this heaven-defying secret in the deepest corners of her mind. Erin hesitated, questioning his motives, but Yer's tone left no room for argument. He explained that he was on the verge of a massive breakthrough and would reveal the truth when the time was right. She could only bow her head in deep submission. As the golden sun dipped below the horizon, another day of hidden cultivation came to an end. The bustling household staff bowed respectfully, wishing the young master a peaceful night's rest. It seemed like just another perfectly normal evening. That is, until a seemingly ordinary servant named Peru walked past. The man offered a shallow fake bow before quickly changing his path, scurrying off into the shadows. Yer's playful demeanor vanished in an instant, replaced by a gaze as cold as the abyss. It was time to hunt. He silently activated his omniscient system skill, the Creator's Eye. The golden floating text exposed the servant's darkest secrets in an instant. Target, Peru. Magical affinity, absolute 0. Hidden traits, agile movement, and poisonous touch. Yer's eyes narrowed dangerously. This vile hidden ability made him the perfect assassin to slip lethal venom into his daily meals. There was no longer a shadow of a doubt. This rat was the traitor. And, to make sure, he would test his newly awakened powers in a real combat scenario. Invisible spiritual energy condensed in the palm of his hand, forming a terrifying, ethereal dart locked right onto the assassin's back. Whispering the dark invocation of a paralytic curse, his boundless aura coiled tightly around his fingertips. Suddenly, a chilling, unnatural dread crept up Peru's spine. The treacherous servant felt an ominous stiffness spreading through his veins. He tried to whip around, opening his mouth to scream, but his muscles locked completely. He was entirely paralyzed. A moment later, his vision went black. Yer calmly strolled over to the crumpled, pathetic figure, declaring that his first real combat test was a flawless victory. The system timer confirmed the paralysis would last exactly 1 hour. With a grim smirk, Yer hauled the dead weight of the assassin onto his shoulders and dragged him into the unforgiving darkness. When the traitor finally awoke in a desolate, abandoned storage room, a nightmare awaited him. Yer slapped the coward awake, demanding to know if his worthless brain could comprehend exactly whose presence he was in. Peru trembled like a leaf in a hurricane, his eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated terror. Leaning in close, Yer whispered that if this rat wanted to keep his pathetic life, he had better not lie. The interrogation began with a terrifyingly simple question. Was it him who laced the master's spiritual soup with deadly venom? The killing intent in the room was suffocating. Ur made the rules clear. The paralyzed assassin could only communicate with his eyes. Blink once for yes, blink twice for no. Ur's voice was like grinding steel as he demanded to know if the scum understood his terms. Sweating bullets. Peru frantically blinked a single time. Yes, he understood perfectly. Ur's eyes flashed with a demonic light. He slowly repeated his first fateful question, demanding absolute confirmation that this was the very man trying to end his cultivation journey. Despite the terror, Peru tried to maintain a hardened, cold glare, but his body betrayed him as he blinked once. Guilty. A terrifying grin stretched across Ur's face. He then pressed deeper, asking if the lethal substance used was the notorious Han Yang. Poisonous herb! Peru violently flinched, all color draining from his face as he blinked once more in confession. The truth was out. Now, stepping into the true heart of the conspiracy, the young master leaned in, demanding to know the identity of the mastermind who sent him. The mastermind was Marquis Ka? Yurin's eyes narrowed in surprise, as Peru desperately shook his head. He warned the trembling assassin not to dare speak a single lie. I can see right through your pathetic deception, Yurin threatened with a dark glare. And if you lie to me again, your life will end right here. I will ask you one final time. Did Lady Ka issue this assassination order? Peru trembled like a leaf in a storm, sobbing out another desperate denial. Yurin studied the man's terrified eyes. He clearly wasn't faking this sheer panic. Deciding to play the villain a little longer, Yurin forced a dark pill into the assassin's mouth. Swallow it, he commanded coldly. You have just consumed the heart-sealing demonic poison. As Peru gulped it down in absolute terror, Yurin's voice dropped to a chilling whisper. From this exact moment, you have exactly 30 days left to live. Without my exclusive antidote, your internal organs will slowly melt into black sludge. If you wish to keep breathing, you belong to me now. Do we have an understanding? Peru nodded frantically, tears streaming down his face. Satisfied, Yurin reached out and tapped the assassin's pressure points, dissolving the paralyzing chi. The heavy, invisible chains finally vanished. Your body is your own again. You may speak, Yurin stated coldly. Gasping for air, Peru bowed deeply. Now, tell me the name of your true master. Peru shuddered violently, the sheer terror threatening to consume him. It was Knight Commander Carrick, of the Titanite family, he confessed wildly. The sinister commander had ordered that the young master must meet a tragic end, disguised as a battlefield casualty before the year concluded. Yurin mentally connected the dots. Carrick was Lady Ka's older brother, a fool who bought his rank through family ties. But that useless detail hardly mattered right now. Pulling out a scroll, he tossed it to his newly acquired pawn. Peru's eyes widened, reading the list. Aren't these all deadly toxins? Yurin smirked inwardly. This assassin's knowledge of the poison arts was surprisingly vast. A shadow like you knows the underworld black markets intimately, Yurin commanded. Drain Carrick's funds dry if you must, but secure every single herb on this list. Bring them to me by tomorrow night, starting with the venom you already carry. Peru couldn't hide his confusion. But young master, why gather such lethal substances? Yurin's eyes flashed with a dangerous, oppressive light. Did I grant you permission to question your new master? The terrifying aura silenced Peru instantly. Bowing his head in deep submission, he obediently accepted the deadly mission. Turning away, Yurin issued his final decree. Make haste. And from this day forward, ensure my daily medicinal broth is laced with a heavy dose of hamyang grass. Peru gasped, absolutely paralyzed by the suicidal command. Later, in the absolute silence of his chambers, Yurin chuckled to himself. The Murim's martial arts are terrifyingly effective, he whispered. To think a seasoned assassin fell for a fake poison, crafted from some random backyard weeds. The bluff had worked flawlessly. But there was no time to celebrate. He needed to awaken his foundation immediately, and master the legendary poison arts of the Four Heavenly Tangs. As the author of this world, he knew that failing to follow the timeline would trigger catastrophic global disasters. Exactly 24 hours later, the assassin returned to the shadows of the estate. Young master, Peru whispered, I have secured every lethal herb available. Laying out the dark, twisted roots upon the desk, Yurin inspected the deadly harvest. Excellent. Hamyang grass, the reverse green creeper, and the infamous crow ink leaf. Peru's jaw nearly hit the floor. How does a noble recognize such rare demonic herbs? He blurted out in utter disbelief. This is merely elementary knowledge, Yurin scoffed. In reality, a glowing blue status window hovered over each plant, revealing their exact names, shifting the focus entirely. He questioned his subordinate. Hamyung grass is lethal enough to kill a man. Why bother acquiring these supplementary toxins? Peru quickly explained the dark path of an assassin. Hamyung grass acts too slowly, my lord. If the target develops a qi resistance, they can endure it. But by fusing it with the reverse green creeper, the toxic properties multiply tenfold. Yurian nodded, piecing the deadly logic together. So, the synergy of cultivation poisons creates an exponentially deadlier compound that completely evades detection. Intrigued, Yurian asked where he mastered such dark arts. A shadow crossed Peru's eyes. At the age of 8, I was sold to the Titanite family and thrown into a demonic poison master's pit. There were 20 innocent children in that hell. One by one, their bodies melted away in agony, until only I remained standing. A natural-born poison physique, Yurian realized in awe. Without an affinity for venom, those children stood no chance. Looking at the fierce hatred in Peru's eyes, it was clear the man despised his former masters. I have claimed a truly legendary pawn, Yurian smiled. You have done exceptionally well. Dismissed. Bowing with newfound respect, Peru vanished into the dead of night. Finally, alone in his chambers, Yurian's gaze locked onto the deadly harvest. The time for awakening has come. Without a single second of hesitation, he grabbed the lethal herbs and shoved them straight into his mouth. Instantly, a horrific, burning sensation tore through his throat, like swallowed hellfire. A system alert suddenly echoed in his mind. Multiple lethal toxins had been ingested, and his life force was rapidly dropping. He had to immediately commence cultivation to break through to the second star. Gritting his teeth against the agonizing pain, Yurian forced himself into the lotus position. He began to circulate his internal energy with desperate, unwavering focus. Dawn broke over the estate. A gentle knock echoed through the hallway as the maid, Ara, called out softly, "Young master, the morning sun has risen." Entering the room, she gasped in pure astonishment. The typically lazy lord was wide awake, seated on his bed, radiating an otherworldly aura, heavens above. "What magical transformation has occurred?" she stammered. Through the night of agonizing refinement, Yurian had successfully shattered his limits, ascending to the 2-star realm. He had unlocked the draconic treasure martial art and assimilated 3 deadly poison traits into his core. Opening his eyes, a triumphant smirk graced his lips. Ara stepped closer, totally bewildered by his new presence, but suddenly pinched her nose in absolute disgust. "Young master, what is that dreadful stench?" Yurian awkwardly scratched the back of his head. "Ah, the classic Murim trope is real," he mused internally. When a martial artist breaks through their foundation, the body violently expels years of hidden impurities. Looking down at his dark, sweat-drenched clothes, he chuckled in amusement. "It is quite pungent, isn't it? Let's get some fresh air in here." "No, absolutely not," Ara scolded frantically. "You are marching straight to the bathhouse this instant." Dragging the newly awakened cultivator down the hall, she aggressively guided his way. Yurian couldn't help but burst into laughter, already visualizing the divine movements of the draconic arts. The legendary shadow step technique, an optimized movement and evasion art, heavily guarded by the formidable Tang family. He could not believe his own fortune. To actually learn a divine martial art that only existed in fantasy novels. For now, he decided to merely mimic the intricate footwork. Just then, his loyal maid, Erin, called out to the young master. She turned with a deeply worried expression, desperate to know why he was suddenly staggering around like a complete drunkard. Was his physical foundation damaged? But the reincarnated protagonist simply smiled. He assured her that his body was in perfect condition, and she had absolutely no reason to worry. Laughing softly while swaying from side to side, Erin still questioned if he was truly all right. After all, they were heading to the first training hall today, a dangerous place overflowing with seasoned elite knights. However, the young master confidently confirmed his absolute well-being. He was merely curious about the knight's cultivation and training methods. She truly did not need to fret over his safety. Erin gently warned him that they had almost arrived. Inside, the knights trained with grueling intensity, their heavy blades slicing through the air, with devastating vertical strikes and horizontal sweeps. Suddenly, one of the knights gasped in absolute shock. He pointed and questioned the identity of the newcomer, because that woman was clearly the eldest young master's personal servant. But who in the heavens was that breathtakingly handsome youth walking behind her? The entire hall erupted in sheer astonishment. They remembered the rumors of the young master shedding massive weight through hellish physical conditioning. What kind of divine magic did he use to transform from absolute trash into this peerless figure? The protagonist simply smirked inwardly. It did not matter how quietly these arrogant fools whispered. His refined internal energy allowed him to hear every single breath. Aaron then pointed toward a young man in the corridor. He was completely absorbed in his martial training. Though he appeared to be a mere knight apprentice, his foundational posture was absolutely flawless. He was bound to break through to the novice realm very soon. These strikes were the foundational forms of the legendary Rock's fencing style. She urged the young master to observe his technique carefully. But as Yurian locked his gaze onto the young swordsman, a revelation struck him. This was Clyde, a pivotal character in the original novel who was destined to become his greatest ally. The author had never penned the details of Clyde's obscure past before his legendary awakening. As Clyde delivered a perfectly executed downward slash, Yurian smiled, thinking how incredibly interesting it was to find him hiding in a place like this. But molding his destiny could wait for a better opportunity. Today, these arrogant knights, who had always looked down on him, would serve as his personal test subjects. First, he would test the agony chain technique. He locked his spiritual sense onto a purple-haired knight, marking him as the ultimate target. The moment he activated the dark art, the knight felt a devastating shockwave. He crashed to the training floor, landing hard on his knees. Panic erupted as the others rushed toward him. They frantically asked what invisible force had struck him, or if he simply had a sudden stomachache. The man vehemently denied it. Saliva dripped from his mouth as he desperately tried to endure the soul-crushing agony. He collapsed entirely, prompting the knights to scream that they needed to summon a high priest immediately. But just as suddenly as it appeared, the excruciating pain vanished without a trace. His commander furiously demanded to know what was wrong. The agony had completely faded, and the commander barked, asking if he was daring to play a prank during training. He harshly ordered him to go use the restroom. The humiliated knight desperately tried to argue that he was genuinely suffering from an incomprehensible torment. Watching from afar, Yurian smirked. The results were absolutely perfect. This time, he decided to unleash the terrifying soul disintegration mist, a forbidden spiritual art that inflicts mind-shattering fear and absolute chaos upon any target within its domain. Suddenly, a deafening bang echoed through the hall. A knight stared in absolute horror as the man before him twisted into a terrifying, bloodthirsty demon. Aaron watched in total bewilderment as grown men collapsed to the ground, screaming and begging for the demonic entity to spare them. She questioned what in the world had possessed them to act so pitifully. Trapped within the illusionary nightmare, the knight faced a towering demon and a rotting skeleton, both lunging forward to reap his very soul. He cursed the heavens in pure despair. But with a mere thought, the illusion entirely vanished. The knights gasped for breath, terrified and confused by the sudden demonic encounter. Yurian knew he could not completely break their minds yet. That was more than enough testing for one day. The results of his dark arts were truly impressive. Feigning boredom, he calmly announced his departure. Aaron looked surprised, questioning if he was retreating from the training grounds so early. The protagonist simply replied that it was far too noisy here. He would proceed to the fourth hall as originally planned. As they walked back, they crossed paths with a young maid. She hastily bowed, announcing that an important guest had arrived for the young master. Lady Ilya of the Marcus family had come seeking an audience. Meanwhile, the proud young woman waiting by the window gritted her teeth. This time, she swore she would completely shatter Yurian's stubborn resistance. But as she turned to face the entering protagonist, he merely spoke her name with absolute calm. The haughty girl's face instantly flushed with a deep crimson blush. Yurian casually asked if she had been waiting long. Ilya stared in complete disbelief, unable to recognize him, and demanded to know who this godlike stranger was. Earlier, when the maid had first announced Lady Ilya's arrival, the protagonist instantly remembered his plot knowledge. This was his notoriously strong-willed fiancée coming to confront him. According to the original fate, this was the exact moment she would demand to break off their engagement. In the past, the pathetic Yurian had desperately begged and refused, pleading with her not to abandon him. But the reincarnated young man knew this destined clash could not be avoided. Back in the reception room, the protagonist softly replied that it was indeed him. He was Yurian. The noble girl gasped in absolute shock, as he offered a gentle smile and said it had been quite a while. Ilya stammered, admitting she had heard the wild rumors about his weight loss through extreme martial training, but she had firmly believed it was all just baseless gossip. Because it had not even been 2 months. How could a piece of trash transform so magnificently in such a short time? The protagonist calmly stated that it was simply the fruit of his relentless cultivation. His serene aura left Ilya utterly confused and speechless. He explained that after suffering a humiliating defeat, he had reflected deeply on his martial path. He had finally decided to rewrite his own destiny. Ilya cautiously asked if he was cultivating so desperately to seek bloody revenge, but the young master simply shook his head and refused that path. He humbly lowered his stance, expressing his deepest gratitude to her, because her harsh rejection had finally awakened him from his pathetic delusions. He was truly, deeply sorry for the burden his past self had caused. With unwavering eyes, he declared he would peacefully accept it if she wished to break their engagement here and now. Overwhelmed by his majestic presence, she could only step back and ask who he truly was. She simply could not recognize the man before her. Yurian softly replied that he was merely the former trash of the legendary Rox family. Once again, he bowed his head, offering a profound apology for his past transgressions. Ilya was completely shaken to her core by this uncharacteristic display of honor. Inwardly, the protagonist sighed. To be completely honest, none of this pathetic history was actually his fault. It was the massive karmic debt left behind by the original owner of this body. Lifeless bodies. His desperate plea for forgiveness wasn't just born from a guilty conscience. Ilya was far from an ordinary heroine. She carried the legendary destiny of the Sword Queen, an innate talent that elevated her martial prowess to terrifying heights. In the original fate, she was destined to rescue his fallen past self and, ultimately, strike down the final villain. All of that incredible triumph was forged by her overwhelming power. That was exactly why, even if their betrothal was currently in ruins, it would be an absolute game-changer to mend their severed ties and forge an unbreakable alliance. But Ilya coldly ordered him to his feet, her gaze sharp as she questioned if he truly grasped the gravity of his words. Yurian swore his absolute conviction, but the proud swordswoman wasn't easily swayed. She demanded a binding oath, unleashing a blood-chilling aura that instantly turned the atmosphere hostile. The invisible pressure crashed down on Yurian like a falling mountain, triggering a sudden realization that he had faced this exact overwhelming scenario in a past life. Ilya fiercely declared she refused to live, chained to his pathetic shadows, warning that if he betrayed this pact, she would mercilessly destroy him. Yurian blinked through the heavy pressure, utterly baffled, because those were the exact words the original Ilya had spat at the true protagonist. Regardless of shifting destinies, his lungs burned for oxygen. Desperate, he rapidly circulated the myriad poison-electric divine art to withstand the crushing spiritual weight. Ilya's eyes widened in sheer disbelief as the supposedly weak young master pushed through her suppression and casually stood tall. She was baffled by his resistance against her dominating aura, yet Yurian simply accepted her harsh terms, sealing his vow. With a heart-fluttering, gentle smile, a sudden rosy flush painted Ilya's cheeks, and she hastily spun around to flee, masking her fluster with a sharp warning that she would be scrutinizing his every move. If he dared to make a fool of himself one more time, their engagement would be annihilated. With absolutely no room for excuses, Yurian watched her leave in stunned silence, practically shell-shocked that their precarious betrothal hadn't been obliterated yet. Meanwhile, within the imposing halls of the Lord's castle, the mighty Wellington asked if she had tracked down Yurian. The fierce warrior gave a firm nod, prompting the patriarch to ask the ultimate question. Had she finalized her decision? Ilya's response was as unyielding as iron, stating fiercely that their engagement would remain completely unbroken. No matter what forces tried to intervene. Wellington raised a curious eyebrow, demanding the logic behind her choice. Ilya took a breath, recalling her father's cynical teachings that a person's core nature could never truly change. Yet, the blazing rumors echoing through the estate claimed that he had somehow shattered that absolute rule, igniting her fierce curiosity. She had initially sought him out, fully expecting to confront the exact same fragile, soft-spoken Yurian from her fading childhood memories. Instead, standing before her was an entirely different existence, radiating an explosive and unfamiliar strength. That thrilling evolution was the sole reason she was willing to gamble her trust on his path, just this once. Wellington rumbled with deep laughter, asking if that was truly her only motive, and the proud girl gave a sharp nod, though she added with a dangerous glint in her eyes that if he ever reverted to being a pathetic loser, she would personally beat sense into him until her knuckles bled. Wellington beamed, praising that such fiery spirit was exactly what he expected from a future conqueror, happily entrusting his son's discipline to her capable hands. Ilya bowed and prepared to depart the grand halls, but the imposing lord gently requested her to linger within the territory for just a few more days. The young swordswoman shifted awkwardly, admitting the complication that she had already sworn to her own father she was severing the marriage pact, making her sudden reversal incredibly complicated to explain. Wellington offered a knowing smirk, asking if she planned to grace Yurian with a farewell visit, but Ilya firmly refused, knowing he was deep in cultivation and refusing to shatter his intense martial focus. As a new dawn painted the sky, Yurian walked the estate grounds, racking his brain over his sudden summons by the patriarch. He gave his head a firm shake when his father cryptically asked if he realized who he truly was. The young master just stared blankly, completely thrown off by the philosophical riddle. Wellington let out a booming laugh, waving it off as a harmless jest, praising Yurian's recent blood, sweat, and tears. But his tone suddenly shifted to deadly serious, asking if his son realized the true gravity of this summons. Yurian met his intense gaze, guessing it marked the long-awaited initiation into his knightly training. Wellington's eyes gleamed with pride, impressed by how dangerously sharp his son's instincts had become. The time had finally come for him to inherit the legendary swordsmanship of the Rock bloodline. But instead of bowing in supreme gratitude, the young master looked the Marquis dead in the eye, boldly declaring that he had forged an entirely different path. His father's brow furrowed in utter confusion when Yurian revealed his burning desire to master the hidden throwing arts, completely rejecting the noble supremacy of the blade. Yurian stood his ground, cementing his unprecedented martial choice. Wellington's formidable aura flared with absolute outrage, slamming the idea down as an unforgivable disgrace. He roared that such vulgar and underhanded tactics belonged strictly to gutter trash and filthy bandits. Clinging to such pathetic tricks would never earn him a knight's honored crest, nor would it even manage to scratch a bottom-tier demonic beast like the iron-skinned Borak. Unfazed by the thunderous scolding, Yurian's lips curled into a daring smirk as he proposed a deadly wager. He bet his entire future that he could slaughter a Borak using nothing but a simple dagger. If the great Marquis was truly so confident in his knightly traditions, he shouldn't hesitate to accept the gamble. His father scoffed, practically vibrating with fury at this arrogant display of rebellion. He warned that a true warrior's steel required the destructive explosion of aura just to dent a Borak's impenetrable scales. Unless someone had spent a century bleeding over the art of throwing, they would never, in this lifetime, pierce that beast's monstrous armor. The young master's eyes flashed with calculated brilliance as he fired back that, with such absolute certainty, his father's victory was practically guaranteed. So there was absolutely no reason to refuse this clash of ideals. The patriarch slammed his fist down, branding his son a reckless fool, and declared he would use this perfect opportunity to completely shatter his ridiculous stubbornness once and for all. Demanding to hear the terms of this suicidal pact, Yurian's voice rang with absolute confidence. If he successfully executed the monstrous Borak with his mere throwing blade, he gained absolute sovereignty over his own martial destiny. But should he fail, he would surrender entirely to the Marquis's iron command. As the sun dipped beneath the horizon, Yurian smirked in the shadows, relieved his loyal knight Aaron had kept his secret cultivation hidden. The true trial of life and death would unfold. When tomorrow's sun reached its peak, he mentally calculated the exact lethal force required to shatter the demonic beast's scales. To ensure absolute victory, he prepared to consume highly toxic spirit herbs that very night, forcing a terrifying breakthrough to elevate his myriad poisoned divine body to the realm of 3 stars. Suddenly, the sharp snap of footsteps broke his concentration. Aaron bowed deeply before the young master, breaking the silence to deliver an urgent decree straight from the Marquis himself. When the sun struck the highest point of noon tomorrow, the battlefield would be the grand arena of the first training center. Yurian raised a curious eyebrow, asking if she had already caught wind of this insane gamble. Aaron shook her head with a heavy sigh, revealing that not just her, but the entire territory was already buzzing with the scandalous news. The sheer absurdity of the bet had the whole estate erupting into uproarious, mocking laughter. The guards and servants were gleefully betting on whether the disgraced heir would soil his pants in terror or pathetically flee the moment the massive Borak bared its fangs. They were having an absolute feast discussing his impending doom. After all, in their eyes, the young master was still the estate's absolute public enemy number one. Yurian simply chuckled darkly, his eyes gleaming with anticipation, declaring that, "Case, every single eye in the territory will be watching tomorrow." Aaron confirmed the rumors, warning that the Marquis wouldn't just stop there, and the massive training center would be packed to the brim. The young master sighed, grumbling that this was the exhausting price of fame. But he turned, curious to know what Aaron predicted would happen. With a bright smile, she declared it was finally the young master's day to shine. After all, his myriad poison, divine body technique had just broken through to the 3-star realm. The great hour of the ultimate test had arrived. The massive crowd roared, shouting, fiercely in both support and mockery of the infamous young master. Yurian rubbed his temples, muttering how truly embarrassing this spectacle was. His father kicked off the grand event, loudly demanding to know if his son was prepared. The young man nodded coolly, casually pointing out the overwhelmingly huge audience. Marquis Wellington scoffed, claiming he had only informed the head wizard, yet somehow the juicy gossip had spread like wildfire. "Just try not to embarrass yourself out there," he warned. The Grand Wizard stepped forward, announcing the commencement of his low-tier summoning magic. Yurian's eyes narrowed, thrilled that he would finally witness real magic with his very own eyes. Crack! A blinding bolt of lightning struck the arena. Amidst the billowing smoke, a monstrous silhouette began to take form. The bold young master gasped. There was something far more unbelievable happening here. He was staring dead at a creature he had personally designed as an author, manifesting right before his eyes. A Borak, a vicious sea monster standing exactly 1.5 meters tall. The audience shielded their eyes in absolute terror. It was a pure nightmare, made flesh. But the protagonist was thoroughly impressed. The manifestation was flawlessly accurate to his novel. This very monster, the Borak, was a brilliant concept that had popped into his head while casually eating purple fish sashimi and brainstorming beast designs. To him, if it weren't for those grotesque arms and legs, the thing would actually be kind of cute. Roar! The beast violently charged the young master. Yurian merely tracked its ferocious trajectory, effortlessly sidestepping to glide right behind the beast. The crowd gasped in awe, but the Marquis fiercely declared the battle wasn't over yet. The Borak spun around, completely bewildered by its missing prey. The protagonist smirked, realizing the mindless brute had charged without a single tactical thought. It was significantly slower than he had envisioned in his drafts. Drawing his dagger, he decided to first test the absolute toughness of its scaly armor. Then, his eyes locked onto an anomaly. A glaring, target-like system mark pulsed violently, exposing the creature's absolute fatal weak point. The young master didn't hesitate. He whipped his arm back for a lethal throw, his inner ki aggressively channeled into the cold steel, whistling through the air and striking the beast's hidden vital spot. The Borak shrieked in agonizing pain, instantly crashing to the dirt, utterly defeated. It completely ruined any hope of an epic, drawn-out spectacle for the thirsty audience. The protagonist clicked his tongue in disappointment, grumbling that the beast had crumpled in a single strike. The spectators were absolutely floored. Marquis Wellington stood frozen in pure, unadulterated shock. The crowd erupted, screaming their lungs out for the young master, roaring that he had achieved the impossible. The trashed young master had flawlessly executed a Borak, looking impossibly cool doing it. Thunderous applause shook the arena, until a furious voice shattered the noise. Yurian Ubat, demanding to know what kind of dark trickery he had just used. Unfazed, the protagonist coldly replied that he simply aimed with perfect precision and struck the fatal flaw. His father's face turned red with denial, screaming that he absolutely refused to accept this result. A monstrous Borak being, slain by a basic iron dagger? It defied all common sense. The young master tilted his head. "Is the great Marquis going to swallow his own honorable words?" he challenged mockingly. The head wizard quickly intervened, bowing to the Marquis to explain that beneath the beast's arm lay a tiny, unscaled patch, and the young master had pierced it with godly accuracy. Wellington gritted his teeth, snarling that it was nothing but dumb luck. But Yurian smirked, reminding him a bet was still a sacred bet. Desperate to save face, his father demanded just one final round, throwing a far more enticing promise onto the table. If you win this time, I will grant you one absolute wish, no questions asked. But if you lose, you crawl back to the training hall and master the sword as we previously agreed. The protagonist's eyes gleamed with raw excitement. The Marquis coldly announced that his next opponent wouldn't be a mindless beast, but a genuine, battle-forged, human warrior, he sneered, demanding if his son had the guts to accept. Bring it on, the young master scoffed, shrugging off the threat. To him, it was the ultimate opportunity. He briefly considered challenging the arrogant knight commander, Kirox himself, wondering if this was the fated moment to shatter that bastard's towering ego. However, revealing the lethal Peru's poison technique right now was too risky. He decided to let the commander breathe, for just a little longer. Wellington, playing the merciful father, declared that a fully awakened knight would absolutely butcher him. Therefore, he would throw a mere apprentice into the ring to keep things fair. The protagonist stroked his chin, a wicked glint in his eye, asking if he had the honor of choosing his own victim. His finger pointed directly at Clyde. The chosen apprentice stepped heavily toward the blood-stained sands, his greatsword strapped to his back. As he knelt before the Marquis, Wellington glared at his son, remarking on the sheer suicidal arrogance of dragging Clyde into this mess. The stoic apprentice bowed deeply, swearing on his honor to execute his lord's every command. Beat some sense into that boy, the Marquis barked. Clyde pivoted, his expression hardening into stone. Yet, the young master simply offered a bright, cheeky wave, leaving the hardened fencing apprentice completely thrown off balance. Wellington frowned, demanding to know if the boy's bizarre confidence was making Clyde hesitate. Clyde firmly shook his head, vowing he would discipline him as ordered. But the protagonist chuckled, telling the tense warrior to relax. I'll only throw exactly 3 daggers. If you can block them all, you win. Wellington's blood boiled at the sheer disrespect. Do you hear this brat's arrogance? He roared at Clyde. Make sure you carve a permanent lesson into his flesh. Clyde slowly drew his blade as the protagonist began a predatory circle around the arena. The senior knights jeered from the sidelines, warning Clyde that if he somehow lost to this trash, he'd be starved of dinner and forced to run 100 brutal laps around the training grounds. The tension in a delicate voice pierced the crowd's tense silence, cheering the young master on. He smiled inwardly. At least someone in this audience believed in his victory. I am ready, young master. Clyde's voice rang out. Yurian turned to face his opponent, his eyes locked in dead focus. He drew his first throwing dagger, intending to end this match in a single, blinding flash. But his sharp gaze caught something unusual. Compared to his previous clash with Borak, Clyde's stance was absolutely riddled with fatal openings. One precise strike to his meridians, and this battle would be over instantly. But Yurian refused to take the easy way out. He launched his first dagger with overwhelming explosive force. Come at me, Clyde roared, bracing, his heavy broadsword to block the strike. Clang! The sheer kinetic impact forced the proud knight back 4 heavy steps. The spectators gasped. What was that? Deafening sound? It echoed through the arena like a massive cannon blast. Marquis Wellington raised a hand in shock, his sharp eyes tracking the fallen blade as it hit the dusty arena floor. How could a mere iron dagger unleash such terrifying internal energy? Across the ring, Clyde stood completely paralyzed. His proud sword now bore a gaping, perfectly round hole. Are you warmed up yet? Yurian's calm voice cut through the silence. You see what happens when you leave your guard wide open, he warned the knight to brace his core. This time he would unleash his true cultivation base. A suffocating spiritual pressure exploded from the young master, making the trainee knight shake to his very soul. Yet, Yurian knew the truth of this world. Clyde possessed the heaven-defying destiny of a true protagonist. He would never break so easily. Deciding to push him to the absolute brink, Yurian gripped his next blade for a break. Devastating frontal assault. Boom! That tremendous shockwave erupted once more. As the lethal strike closed the distance, Clyde desperately swung his longsword to counterattack. Crash! An immense, explosive collision violently shook the entire arena. As the thick smoke slowly cleared, the crowd was left utterly speechless. Even the seasoned Marquis could not believe his eyes. Clyde had been forced onto his knees. He shook with primal terror, staring at his blade that had shattered into 2 useless fragments. The broken steel clattered into the dirt. Marquis Wellington stood completely dumbfounded. He immediately called out to Yurian, declaring that they must speak privately at once, but the young master simply smirked. The duel is not over yet. He raised one final dagger. The Marquis demanded to know why he would continue, since absolute victory was already established. Ignoring his father, Yurian shifted his piercing gaze to the defeated knight. "Lift your head, Clyde." The trembling man looked up at his young master. "Is this truly how you intend to end this battle?" Yurian demanded. "Would a man striving for the pinnacle of knighthood swallow such bitter disgrace? In victory or in crushing defeat, a true warrior must swing his blade until his final breath. That is the martial path." His voice echoed like thunder as he roared, "I ask you one last time, are you going to surrender like a coward?" The crushed knight muttered beneath his breath, slowly raising his heavy eyes to the young master. A fiery spark ignited within his soul. "Bring me a new sword," he bellowed. Rising to his feet, a fierce, untamed aura surged from his body. He declared he would never back down like a dog. The surrounding knights gasped in pure shock, and the Marquis's eyes widened. How could a mere novice abruptly awaken his combat aura like this? Yurian smiled knowingly. Right on cue, Clyde's legendary berserker trait had manifested. Now, the young master could finally test his higher stage cultivation arts. The two warriors locked eyes, the deadly tension slicing through the heavy air. Surging with newfound power, Clyde roared at the young master, telling him to throw his final blade. Marquis Wellington watched in absolute denial. To manifest an aura of this magnitude, this was the heaven-defying talent of a master-class knight. What move could Yurian possibly make against this overwhelming pressure? But the young master remained perfectly calm. "Excellent," he whispered. Channeling his profound internal energy into the final dagger, he stepped forward. But strangely, he tossed the weapon with a remarkably awkward, almost clumsy motion toward his opponent. Clyde blinked in confusion. What was this pathetic throw? Why was it moving so painfully slow? "Are you mocking my resolve?" he furiously shouted. Then, swinging his blade with terrifying force, he attempted to strike the dagger out of the air, but impossibly, it curved around his defense like a phantom. Clyde froze in shock, while Wellington instantly realized the terrifying depth of this martial technique. Squelch. The dagger sank deep into Clyde's flank, stopping merely a fraction of an inch from shattering his bones. Agonizing pain ripped through the knight's meridians, bringing him crashing to the ground. The audience murmured in complete bewilderment. It moved like a snail. Surely, Clyde was just faking this extreme reaction, right? Were they staging this just to protect the young master's face? But Yurian knew the devastating truth behind that strike. He had infused a dense concentration of spiritual qi into the blade, causing absolute havoc within the target's internal pathways. His father's commanding voice echoed, summoning Yurian for a private discussion. After all, the young master had officially won their high-stakes wager. A confident smirk touched Yurian's lips. Meanwhile, the defeated knight writhed in agony from the punishing wound. Yurian stepped forward and placed a hand on his trembling shoulder. "Hold still for a moment," activating his heaven-defying energy. Absorption technique. He steadily drew the violent qi back into his own body. Clyde gasped as the excruciating pain vanished like morning mist. He deeply bowed his head in gratitude, but Yurian waved it off casually. Yet, the knight dropped to one knee, begging for forgiveness. When that final blade moved so slowly, Clyde confessed, "I foolishly believed you were looking down on me, young master, but my eyes were blind to Mount Tai. That trajectory, it was an unfathomably precise martial art. Not even a grandmaster could master such divine control overnight. You have been masking your true cultivation all this time." His eyes shone with intense revelation. "Tell me, is there a shadowy syndicate targeting the noble Marquis' bloodline? Is that why you chose to play the fool, concealing your supreme power from the world until now?" It all made sense. His tarnished reputation was nothing but a brilliant smokescreen. What a tragic, noble sacrifice. Hearing this wild leap in logic, Yurian sighed inwardly. This protagonist always had a dramatic flair for ridiculous conspiracy theories. Completely ignoring Yurian's silent exasperation, Clyde placed a fist over his heart. "Your unyielding resolve against this invisible enemy commands my absolute respect. Should you ever need my blade to fight the darkness, you need only say the word, 'My lord.'" The Yurian couldn't help but marvel at his surging favorability. He gladly accepted the brute's loyalty, promising their paths would cross again. After all, Clyde was a simple but fiercely loyal berserker. Beating his chest, Clyde swore an oath of absolute trust, vowing to shatter, the vile rumors painting the young master as trash. He would echo Yurian's true strength across the entire estate, keeping this powerhouse close. Was a brilliant tactical move. Soon, Clyde would be a one-man army for solo missions. Later, Yurian's loyal butler, Aaron, praised his overwhelming effort. Yurian smiled in gratitude. Her eyes then sharpened, bringing up his final devastating strike, an art she had never witnessed in all her years. Yurian smoothly played it off as a newly awakened skill, asking for her honest critique. Aaron confessed that watching its terrifying power, a chill ran down her spine. Had she faced it blindly, defeat was certain. But now, with her eyes opened, she was confident she could deflect it. Yurian sensed zero hesitation in her voice. This wasn't a bluff. Within her deep arsenal of abilities, she wielded the Tranquil Mind Mirror, a spectacularly rare and profound cultivation trait. She revealed that her grueling night training had begun in early childhood, and had she not momentarily lowered her guard, she would already wear the knight's crest. Staring intensely, Yurian asked if she was truly satisfied, playing the role of a mere servant. Caught off guard, Aaron blinked at the heavy question. Later that afternoon, the sun cast long shadows as Marquis Wellington rested in his grand study. Yurian pushed open the heavy oak doors, questioning his sudden summons. His father's stern face softened. When no one else is watching, he sighed. Just call me father. These stiff formalities suffocate the air. Yurian nodded respectfully, internally stunned by the sudden warmth. The Marquis leaned forward, his aura shifting. He demanded to know the origins of yesterday's technique, because even the oldest family archives held no record of such a bizarre, devastating art. For someone who had only cultivated for a single month, inventing such a profound technique was defying the heavens. The Marquis slammed his hands down, demanding the absolute truth. What had really happened out there? Yurian's mind raced. He couldn't expose his deepest secrets, but a masterful lie was already locked and loaded. He calmly revealed he had discovered a hidden tome. His father's eyes widened with intense curiosity. The young master nodded slowly, weaving a tale of how he had been wandering the deepest shadows of the estate library. Exhausted from searching for cultivation manuals, he leaned against an ancient, crumbling wall. Out of nowhere, a heavy manual plummeted from the highest, dustiest shelf. It bore no title to speak of, only a cryptic, mystical crest glowing on its cover. Brushing off the dust, Yurian carelessly flipped it open. Instantly, a blinding golden light erupted, searing the ancient knowledge directly into his very soul. Then, the artifact shattered into dust. Wellington gasped in pure shock, whispering that it must have been a magic tome. Yurian nodded solemnly. Such artifacts were forged by the dying breath of supreme masters, designed to forcefully inherit their legendary techniques. The lord of the house paced the room, declaring that a magic tome bypassed all natural laws of cultivation. It must have been a sacred relic left behind by their founding ancestors. Unearthing such a treasure was a stroke of heaven-defying fortune. Yurian mentally smirked, accepting this perfect excuse for his monstrous growth. Suddenly, his father rose to his feet. A nobleman's word was iron, and he officially freed Yurian from the shackles of orthodox swordsmanship. And, to honor his overwhelming victory, he offered the boy a single, absolute wish. Yurian locked eyes with his father, his voice ice-cold. He stated he desired the official position of heir. Wellington froze, completely paralyzed by the sheer audacity, granting such a monumental request. Was walking a razor's edge. After a tense silence, the Marquis admitted his absolute authority could force it. Yet, Yurian saw the heavy conflict in his father's eyes. Crowning him, heir would spark a massive political war, as the elders would violently oppose the Marquis house, and the first young lady would unleash absolute chaos upon the estate. Chuckling softly, Yurian pulled back his aggressive play. He would concede this round. His father inquired, but quickly exhaled a massive sigh of relief, deeply grateful for his son's concession. In reality, the thought of the heir's position disgusted the young master. If he took the throne, he would be imprisoned all day, drowning in tedious state management education. Instead, his blood boiled for the martial path. He needed absolute freedom to master the four heavens of the Tang clan, and to travel the mortal realm in search of supreme destiny. Relieved, Wellington urged him to name a different prize. Yurian's eyes gleamed with a predatory light. He declared he would forge his own personal knight order. He claimed Aaron, his brilliant butler, and Clyde, the very berserker he had crushed, in the arena earlier. As his first two sworn knights, his father stroked his chin. This was child's play compared to the bloodbath of naming him successor, and Aaron possessed terrifying martial potential. Wasting her as a mere servant was a crime against talent. The Marquis granted his imperial approval, and Yurian bowed with a victorious smirk. But the Lord raised one eyebrow, questioning who would serve him now, with the estate's staff running thin. Yurian casually mentioned a kitchen worker named Peru. He wanted to elevate him to the rank of personal butler, but he needed the Marquis to play the villain and take the blame for the sudden promotion. Wellington's eyes narrowed sharply, wondering if a hidden conspiracy was brewing in the shadows. Yurian merely smiled, promising the full truth would reveal itself later. With a heavy sigh, his father capitulated. The protagonist walked away genuinely stunned. The Marquis hadn't even interrogated him. This blind, overwhelming trust was staggering. Just how high had his father's favorability spiked? Perhaps blood truly ran thicker than water. Stepping into the sunlit courtyard, Yurian's aura flared as he looked at his two new weapons. They were now the founding members of his exclusive Knight Order. But a title means nothing without strength. They had to bleed through rigorous practical training and welcome their newest addition, the enigmatic butler, Peru. Bowing deeply, Peru humbly asked for their guidance, but Aaron's eyes narrowed in silent suspicion, recalling her private audience with the young master just yesterday. She had fiercely questioned his judgment. Why appoint a shadowy figure like Peru to such a trusted position? The young master merely scratched his head with a carefree smile. He casually revealed that Peru was actually a spy, planted by Commander Karox of the White Eagle faction and Lady Ka. Aaron's grip tightened on her hilt. Spy or not, she refused to let such a dangerous snake slither close to her lord. But the young master firmly declared that Peru was now entirely under his absolute control. Suddenly, Clyde stepped forward, his voice booming with a question. The young master nodded, granting him permission to speak. The aspiring knight puffed out his chest. He argued that even with just 2 members, this was officially a knight order. And every noble vanguard demanded a formidable commander. By the law of the sword, the strongest warrior should claim the ultimate title. He glared at Aaron, dismissing her delicate and slender frame as hopelessly weak. Confident in his brute strength, Clyde declared himself the rightful chief. A knowing smirk crossed the young master's face. He completely agreed. The supreme blade must lead the vanguard. Without hesitation, he ordered a duel to settle the matter. The air instantly grew heavy with tension, but the clash lasted mere seconds. Clyde fell to his knees, utterly defeated. Aaron's cold steel rested gently, yet lethally, against his throat. She coldly analyzed his form, stating his attack patterns were pathetically predictable and required brutal refinement if he ever hoped to survive a real battlefield. Humbled by her overwhelming skill, Clyde bowed his head, swearing to carve her harsh lesson into his very soul. The young master clapped his hands, shattering the tension. He proudly announced that Aaron had undeniably proven her worth, and crowned her the official commander of his vanguard. Even Peru joined in the applause, before bowing to prepare their evening feast. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the young master retreated to the shadows. Sensing he was at a safe distance, he decided to test his newly cultivated internal energy. It was time to unleash a legendary technique, sound transmission. Bypassing the physical voice, he compressed his ki to project his thoughts directly into another's mind. It was a mythic art, straight out of ancient Wuxia legends. Channeling his aura, he sent a piercing mental call, echoing into Peru's brain. The butler instantly flinched and spun around, rushing to answer his master, only to find empty air. The young master playfully projected his name again and again. Invisible whispers haunted the courtyard, leaving the seasoned spy completely terrified and trembling like a leaf. The young master casually asked why he looked like he had seen a ghost. Clutching his head, Peru wailed that he was losing his sanity, begging to know if this was some sinister black magic. Chuckling, the young master explained it was merely a high-level communication art. Peru gulped nervously. It all made terrifying sense now. His master hadn't just survived the deadly poison, he had absorbed its essence. Rumors spoke of dark mages wielding both venom and shadow, leading the trembling butler to believe his lord was a supreme master of the dark arts. The young master just sighed, too lazy to explain the profound path of cultivation. He let the fool believe his wild theories, and cut straight to business. Was the special poison he requested finally prepared? Peru nodded frantically. The dreaded snake's mind, a lethal concoction distilled from 100 deadly vipers, was completely ready. A dangerous glint flashed in the young master's eyes. He ordered Peru to dump a massive dose of it, directly into the upcoming celebration soup. Peru's blood ran cold. Shivering in absolute terror, he bowed and accepted the demonic order. As dawn broke the following day, the young master opened his eyes from profound meditation. A heavy sigh escaped his lips. His cultivation base was agonizingly stuck at the 3-star realm, and his internal chi was stagnating like dead water. Time was running out. With an apocalyptic crisis looming on the horizon, he couldn't afford to waste another second. Trapped within the comfortable walls of the Marquis's domain, he needed a breakthrough. Marching straight into his father's imposing study, he boldly declared his intent to leave. Lord Wellington lowered his pen, his eyes narrowing at his son. It had been an eternity since the boy showed interest in the outside world. He assumed his son merely wished to visit a bustling town within their own territory. The young master gave a vague nod of confirmation. Stroking his beard, his father asked exactly how many days this little excursion would take. The young master held back a scoff. He was aiming for lands far beyond their borders, but keeping up appearances was necessary. He casually estimated a week-long journey. Wellington nodded in understanding, acknowledging his son's recent, grueling training sessions. He then asked which elite guards he required for his escort. Without skipping a beat, the young master rejected the offer entirely. Escorts were for the weak! Wellington slammed his hands on the desk, utterly bewildered. He furiously reminded the reckless youth of his noble bloodline. As the eldest heir to the esteemed Marquis Rox, the young master shrugged off the heavy expectation. He argued that parading an elite guard to a simple nearby town would draw unwanted and ridiculous attention. Wellington's voice thundered through the study. He roared that the outside world was a ruthless, unforgiving abyss. His son may have gained some basic martial strength recently, but the haunting memory of the assassination by poison still terrified the lord. The young master inwardly smirked. Little did his father know. Mortal venoms were mere nourishment for his divine ki. But arguing with a stubborn patriarch was a waste of breath. Feigning obedience, he smoothly bowed his head and agreed to the protective detail. Satisfied, his father demanded to know the exact time of departure. The young master calculated swiftly, claiming he would leave in 2 days. Hearing this, Wellington vowed to personally select the most elite vanguards for the mission. The young master just smiled internally. Let the old man prepare all he wanted. He was already planning to vanish into the dead of night by tomorrow. As a sea of stars blanketed the evening sky, he summoned his shadowy butler into his chambers. He revealed his secret grand departure. But there was one crucial problem. He was completely broke. He extended his hand, demanding the secret funds. The exact heavy coin purse Commander Karox had supplied for purchasing high-grade, black-market potions. He threw a threatening glare, daring the spy to withhold the gold. Sweating bullets, Peru vehemently denied any treason. He bowed deeply, declaring it an absolute honor to fund his master's journey. But the young master's greedy gaze didn't stop there. He demanded to know what other treasures the butler was hiding. His piercing eyes had already locked onto the spatial pouch Peru used to smuggle the venomous herbs. A legendary artifact woven from dimensional magic, capable of swallowing tons of supplies into the void. Such an item was absolutely vital for a cultivator's long journey. Trembling with deep reluctance, Peru unclipped his prized artifact and surrendered it. The young master snatched the dimensional bag with a triumphant grin. Our protagonist expressed his deep gratitude. With a new spatial artifact secured, a cumbersome backpack was no longer necessary. However, he offered a parting gift. He revealed a mysterious, pitch-black pill. It was a masterfully forged counterfeit. He coldly declared it was merely a temporary antidote. It would suppress the lethal poison in Peru's veins for exactly 1 month. "You have proven quite useful," the young master stated with a chilling gaze. "Serve me well in the future, and the complete cure shall be yours." This promise of salvation ignited a fire of absolute loyalty within Peru. Before dawn could break the following morning, our protagonist prepared for a phantom-like departure. Evading his assigned royal escort was his absolute priority. He slipped through the sprawling Marquis estate like a shadow in the night. His footfalls made absolutely zero sound. Just as his tactical mind calculated, the grand halls were completely devoid of life. However, an old gardener suddenly caught sight of the young master. He offered a polite, early morning greeting. The protagonist returned a mere, subtle nod. But instantly, his sharp senses flared. An unfathomable surge of martial aura radiated from this seemingly fragile, green-thumbed old man. Who was this hidden master tending to mere flowers? Activating his divine ocular skill, the Creator's Eye, the floating system window, revealed a mind-bending truth. His hidden cultivation realm was utterly terrifying. Leaving the stifling estate behind, the protagonist inhaled the sweet scent of true freedom. It was his first time stepping beyond the Marquis's domain. Towering in the distance, a magnificent structure pierced the heavens. It was the legendary Magic Tower. An arcane scholar at the grand reception desk noticed the young master approaching. "How may the arcane arts serve you today?" The young master calmly stated that he required immediate access to the spatial portal. The mage inquired if he was experienced with spatial magic. Our protagonist simply shook his head. The polite receptionist cheerfully explained their magical loyalty reward system. The protagonist chuckled inwardly. This fantasy world possessed a mileage system exactly like modern airline miles. The arcane scholar respectfully requested his desired coordinates. "Set the coordinates for Asu Castle," he commanded. The receptionist blinked in utter surprise. That territory was located an incredibly far distance away. The spatial transfer fee was a staggering 50 gold coins. After coughing up the extravagant sum, he was required to register a travel identity. The price was steep, but thanks to his subordinate's deep pockets, it was pocket change. To mask his true identity, he registered under an old alias, Polon, his legendary gaming moniker. The mage respectfully guided him forward. He stepped into a chamber humming with ancient runes. He was instructed to wait for a specific magical signal. A loud knock would indicate a successful spatial jump. As he stood within the glowing arcane array, he admired the profound complexity of the magic circle. Suddenly, a blinding flash of azure lightning violently struck the peak of the tower. The sudden surge of mana was completely silent. Before he could even brace himself, a voice echoed out, confirming his arrival. The attendant formally welcomed him to the Grand Asu Castle. The young master was utterly baffled. He hadn't felt even the slightest distortion in space. The proud mage puffed out his chest. "The flawless comfort of our spatial tear is the absolute pride of the Magic Tower." Our protagonist rubbed his chin in deep thought. Had he written the portal magic to be this overwhelmingly smooth in his original web novel? The mage interrupted his musings, bowing respectfully. "May the stars guide your path, honored traveler. Please visit us again." The heavy oak doors swung open wide. A completely foreign world violently rushed into his vision. The atmosphere was thick, with vibrant, bustling energy. This was the famous Asu Castle. Located in the mystical eastern continent, it was entirely alien compared to the Marquis's western domain. The architectural styles possessed a breathtaking, exotic flair. The winding streets were practically overflowing with wandering cultivators. But he had a specific destiny to fulfill. He needed to find the hidden blacksmith's alley. After tossing a few coins to a local informant, he navigated a maze of narrow, shadowed backstreets. He finally arrived before a run-down, dilapidated shack. He let out a heavy sigh of exhaustion. He had been wandering this labyrinth for countless hours. Yet, the legendary unicorn blacksmith was absolutely nowhere to be found. Dark shadows were already swallowing the twilight sky. This crumbling forge was his absolute last glimmer of hope. The rhythmic, heavy clanging of a hammer echoed from within. Sparks danced around an unfinished blade resting upon a massive anvil. "Is the master of this forge present?" Our protagonist called out into the dim room. The soot-covered craftsman paused his relentless strikes. He eyed the mysterious young customer with heavy suspicion. The protagonist stepped forward, immediately cutting to the chase. "I am searching for a hidden master," he declared. "Does anyone in this forgotten district go by the title, the Unicorn Blacksmith?" The muscular craftsman aggressively shook his head. Never heard of a ridiculous name like that in these parts. The young master's heart instantly sank. Had fate truly led him astray? Was his memory of the novel completely flawed? But then, the craftsman scratched his beard and muttered, "Funny you mention it, though. That's the exact name I plan on registering tomorrow." Instantly, our protagonist's eyes ignited with mystic light. He aggressively activated the Creator's Eye. The golden system text descended like a divine decree. Name: Juranox. Innate trait: the absolute forging of demonic armaments. A fierce, knowing grin spread across the young master's face. He had finally found the legendary hidden artisan. He calmly asked to inspect the forge's current, unsold inventory. Juranox gestured lazily toward a dusty corner of the shop. The protagonist's eyes swept over the neglected armory. Blades and breastplates hung forgotten in the shadows. How was the flow of commerce? he casually inquired. The blacksmith let out a bitter, self-deprecating laugh. Located in this dead-end gutter? He scoffed. My forging skills are completely unrecognized by the blind masses. The few wandering cultivators who actually stumble in here. They merely mock my work and leave empty-handed. His voice was heavy with the crushing weight of failure. I will likely face total financial ruin before the month ends, but our protagonist saw through the deception of reality. His internal monologue raced with pure, unadulterated excitement. These weapons were absolutely god-tier artifacts. His gaze locked onto a stunning, silver-hilted blade. The Wind Spirit Rapier, a divine artifact that endlessly multiplied attack and movement speed. Beside it laid an even more terrifying treasure. The Fire Spirit Longsword, a relic capable of explosively amplifying raw physical strength and boundless stamina. Did your own hands forge these marvels? He asked, hiding his overwhelming awe. Juranox nodded slowly, his expression souring with regret. I forged them with my absolute blood and sweat. But they turned out to be catastrophic failures. The moment they cooled, their physical mass became astronomically dense. Not even a peak martial artist could lift them without shattering their own bones. They are cursed to rot on these dusty walls forever. But the young master knew the profound, hidden truth. Those weapons weren't cursed. They possessed a high-tier sentience. They intentionally crushed the bones of the weak and unworthy. Once a fated master gripped their hilts, their true devastating power would erupt. Though he hadn't fully unlocked his own destiny yet, he made a bold, absolute declaration. I shall purchase both of these divine blades. Juranox stared at him like he was a complete madman. I told you, they are heavy trash. Trash to the blind, the young master smirked inwardly. But perfect, heaven-defying artifacts for my loyal retainers, Aaron and Clyde. Yet, his omniscient mind was still calculating. These divine swords were merely appetizers. He had not yet uncovered the true legendary treasure of this forge. His gaze sharpened like a hunting eagle. Master Blacksmith, do you harbor any severely corroded weapons? Juranox frowned, utterly perplexed by this bizarre, nonsensical request. The blacksmith dragged out a wooden chest overflowing with rusted scrap. He scratched his head, completely baffled by the young master's strange request. Normally, he would have just tossed this garbage to the scrap merchants. These rusted blades were completely useless for real combat. But the young master simply smiled, reaching deep into the pile of forgotten iron. This was exactly what he had been looking for. Juranox's eyes widened as he recognized the tarnished blade. He admitted it was one of his own creations. It had been gathering dust in the storehouse long before he took over. Its true origins were a complete mystery. He had almost tossed it into the melting furnace as worthless slag, but some gut feeling told him to keep it. The young master pointed to a seemingly ordinary dagger, claiming it for himself. Juranox blinked in pure disbelief. He explained that since the young master was picking out nothing but flawed junk, 2 gold coins would be more than enough. The dagger would simply be a free bonus. A sly grin crossed the protagonist's face. This was the ultimate steal. If the world knew the heaven-defying truth behind these artifacts, even 200 gold pieces wouldn't be enough to buy a single shard. But the real, hidden treasure here was the blacksmith himself. Leaning in, he casually pointed out that Juranox's forge was barely scraping by, teetering on the edge of financial ruin. He made a bold offer. Shut down this dusty shop and become his exclusive, personal forge master. Juranox stammered, completely caught off guard. This was way too sudden. His mind scrambled to process the unbelievable proposal. Closing shop wasn't a bad idea, but the timing was mind-boggling. The young master realized a proper introduction was in order. He stood tall, declaring his true identity. He was the invincible spear that guarded the south, Juranox of House Rocks. The hammer dropped from Juranox's trembling hands. The Marquis's own flesh and blood? He instantly dropped to his knees, terrified, begging for the young lord's mercy. How could someone of such exalted status set foot in a filthy slum forge? Juranox chuckled, waving a hand to tell him to rise. But the terrified blacksmith violently shook his head. He swore the cold dirt was perfectly comfortable and begged to remain bowed so he could speak freely. The young master sighed at this deep-rooted peasant mindset, but firmly ordered the man to stand up. The strict feudal hierarchy of this world was truly exhausting. Dusting off his knees, Juranox finally asked the burning question. Why would a mighty noble want to employ a 22, worthless, low-class hammer swinger like him? The young master's eyes gleamed with profound insight. It is because of your absolute, unparalleled talent. The blacksmith laughed bitterly, denying any such genius. He had only survived through his former master's brutal, bone-breaking discipline every single day. Uranox nodded in understanding. Surviving a hellish, Spartangent-level training had forged the man's fundamentals into pure steel. Pacing the room, Uranox explained his journey today. He had inspected countless high-end forges and seen hundreds of gleaming weapons, but Uranox's creations possessed a soul. Every strike of his hammer echoed with pure dedication. The balance of his blades was flawless, and the hilts, the grips were absolute perfection. They were meticulously textured to absorb sweat and blood, ensuring a warrior never dropped their lifeline in mortal combat. Witnessing such fanatical attention to detail, Uranox knew it was destiny. This man was guaranteed to awaken a legendary crafting gift. The young master held his breath, waiting to see if he could truly recruit him. Bowing deeply, Uranox swore his total allegiance. He would follow the young master to the ends of the earth. But he admitted, Uranox was nothing like the terrible rumors. The protagonist smirked. "You mean the rumors calling me absolute trash?" Brushing it off, Uranox promised a real show. He was about to reveal something truly magical. He slowly pressed his fingertip against the rusted dagger's edge. A crimson drop fell. He commanded the ancient seal to awaken through his bloodline. Behold, the mythical Aeon's relic of 1,000,000. Shifting forms. Instantly, the rust violently shattered. The blade levitated, glowing with an ethereal light, as it escaped his grasp. Uranox stumbled back in pure horror. What in the heavens was that? A weapon possessing its own soul. It was a legendary ego sword. Uranox smirked, knowing full well that in the original timeline, the main character was destined to claim this divine artifact. Suddenly, a blue holographic system window flashed. "Would you like to forge a soul contract with Aeons?" Without hesitation, he accepted. The spectral entity materialized, its energy twisting into a bizarre shape. A sharp, arrogant voice echoed in his mind. "What the hell is this pathetic situation? Who gave a weakling like you the right to summon my greatness? You possess zero magical talent." Uranox remained completely unfazed. He knew the spirit was throwing a tantrum because it couldn't sense a single drop of conventional mana inside his core. Still, for a rusty blade, its ego was massive. The sword spirit scoffed with immense disgust. This was utterly insulting. A trash-tier human actually dared to attempt a soulbind? But wait, how on earth did you know my secret release enchantment? The young master crossed his arms with a confident grin. "I received a vision from a grand prophet." It was a blatant lie, of course, smoothly crafted to cover up his knowledge of the novel's plot. The spirit of Aeons narrowed its ethereal eyes. "Why would a supreme seer waste their breath on a talentless fool like you? But since you summoned me, you must understand the sheer terror of my abilities." The protagonist nodded, reciting its legendary specs perfectly. It was absolute free-form equipment, capable of dividing into a primary and secondary core, shifting into whatever lethal shape its master's mind could conjure. In the original webtoon chapters, the true hero dual-wielded it as an unbreakable sword and shield. And the best part? Even if the secondary piece was shattered or lost, it would instantly teleport back to the main body. Aeon sneered mockingly. "Knowing my power is useless if you don't know how to wield it. My form can only be manipulated through pure, concentrated mana. You should just sever the contract and give up." Uranox simply stared at the floating spirit with deadpan eyes. He clicked his tongue, muttering that this ancient relic was way too loud. Raising his finger, he visualized the weapon condensing into a simple, elegant ring. Suddenly, the sword spirit shrieked. It was burning. The oppressive heat was melting its very essence. Uranox smiled wickedly. His internal martial arts chi was dominating the mana core perfectly. Subduing the arrogant sword, he turned his attention back to Kama. "Uranox, how much time do you need to pack up this dump?" The blacksmith wiped his sweat, estimating that 2 days would be enough to clear out. Excellent. In exactly 2 days, right at sunset, they would rendezvous at the grand central park of the capital. Fast forward to the appointed hour. Strolling through the park, a sudden, familiar voice pierced the air. Ilya aggressively demanded to know what he was doing in a place like this. Uranox froze, completely caught off guard by her sudden appearance. His mind raced in panic. He wanted to ask her the exact same thing. Looking around, the layout of Central Park triggered a massive sense of déjà vu. This was the exact, fateful location where the novel's original, Hero had his first romantic encounter with Ilya. Staring blankly, he snapped out of it when the girl sharply asked what was wrong with him. Uranox quickly apologized, a cold sweat forming. The original timeline had severely derailed. Ilya gracefully leaped down from her grand stallion, her piercing gaze locking onto him. I asked you a question, young master. Why are you here? Yurian smiled, explaining he was simply looking for a blacksmith. Ilya tilted her head in confusion. After all, the Marquis Rox family had countless master artisans at their disposal. Yurian gently replied that he needed an independent contractor for his personal arts. The young lady sighed softly. She murmured that if he had just said the word, she would have gladly stepped in to help. But Yurian had already found the perfect man for the job. Speak of the devil, heavy footsteps approached. Juranox called out, asking if his new young master had been waiting in the cold. Yurian shook his head, stating his timing was absolutely perfect. Just as he was about to proudly introduce his beautiful fiancé, Ilya, an arrogant voice shattered the moment. A knight demanded the team leader's attention. Their subjugation squad was ready to march, and he sneered, demanding to know who this uninvited stranger was. Ilya's gaze turned frosty. She addressed Musk, introducing Yurian as her betrothed from the Rox family. The commander's face instantly went pale, stuttering the legendary name. He bowed deeply, claiming it was an absolute honor to meet a direct descendant of the Marquis. He puffed out his chest, proudly identifying himself as the Grand Commander of the 5th Night Division. His name was Musk Malone. Yurian nodded lazily, offering a polite but empty greeting. Inwardly, however, he scoffed. He already knew every detail about this man, without hearing his entire life story. To put it bluntly, in the original novel's terms, Musk was nothing more than a pathetic, cannon fodder extra. His personality was as flat as a wooden board. Suddenly, as Musk and his armored knights marched forward, a group of innocent children accidentally blocked their path. In the original timeline, the main character had intervened, sparking a massive brawl. Ilya would then swoop in gracefully to stop the clash, and thus, their fated romance would blossom. But the truly critical event was what followed. The original hero was supposed to join Ilya on the battlefield and awaken his powers to save her from a catastrophic ambush. But Yurian could not rely on the original protagonist anymore. He clenched his fists. He refused to let his fiancée march toward her doom. He called out to her, asking about their sudden deployment. Ilya's expression darkened. The monstrous waves of bloodthirsty orcs around Asu Castle were multiplying. Her knights were ordered to eradicate them immediately. Yurian's eyes narrowed with determination. He told her he had one crucial request. Before she left, he demanded to join the subjugation squad. Ilya blinked in utter shock, questioning his sudden bravery. Yurian flashed a confident smile, claiming that as someone actively cultivating his martial arts, he desperately needed life-or-death combat experience. He wanted to test the limits of his growing aura. Ilya frowned, warning him of the deadly risks. But Yurian shrugged it off, jokingly boasting about his legendary escape skills. The silver-haired swordswoman paused, deeply weighing the options. Finally, she sighed, and ordered Sir Musk to prepare a warhorse for her fiancé. The commander immediately protested. He spat that this was a bloody war zone, not a noble's vacation, against those brutal orcs. One mistake meant death. He glared at Yurian, scoffing that he could not sense a single drop of mana from the young master. He outright refused to act as a babysitter, but Ilya's spiritual pressure flared up. She coldly reminded Sir Musk that this was an absolute command. He needed to shut his mouth and obey. Musk gritted his teeth, swallowing his pride. He bowed stiffly, hissing that he would prepare the mounts. But as he turned his back, a venomous, dark aura leaked from his malicious glare. Yurian and Ilya shared a silent, knowing look. Neither needed words to understand the tension. As the sun began to set, she whispered a final warning. The front lines were no joke, and her fiancé needed to stay right by her side. Yurian nodded calmly. He turned and told Juranox to brace himself for the bumpy ride. The burly blacksmith grinned, fiercely accepting his young master's command. And so, the ironclad vanguard began their march. Approaching the danger zone, Ilya raised her blade. She ordered the division to split into 5-man scouting squads to locate the hidden orc stronghold. Her strict command echoed, "Do not engage the enemy. Retreat instantly, and fire a signal flare upon discovery. Only then would the main force converge to obliterate the target." With the strategy set, her elite squad took the central path. They pushed deep into the wilderness as shadows swallowed the forest. A tense scout muttered curses. The beastly tracks were scattered, fading like ghosts into the pitch-black night. The creeping darkness was suffocating, and morale was dropping fast. Ilya bit her lip. She declared they had no choice but to pull back to the rendezvous point. But suddenly, a piercing shriek shattered the silence. A crimson flare exploded in the night sky. Then another, and another. Red sparks of desperation ignited from multiple directions. Ilya's eyes widened in horror, demanding a quick count. The soldiers shouted that 5 flares had gone up, but Yurian's mind raced, realizing the terrifying truth. Only 4 squads went out. The commander barked the order to charge toward the northwest perimeter immediately. They whipped their horses into a frenzied sprint, but as they crashed through the brush, Ilya felt her stomach drop. The clearing reeked of blood. Every single scout lay lifeless on the cold earth. Her squad gasped in sheer terror. The heavy plate armor wasn't just broken, it was completely melted away. What kind of monstrous magic could do this? Suppressing her grief, Ilya commanded a full-speed advance toward the southern flare. There was no time to mourn. They rode like the wind, desperation fueling their desperate charge. But upon reaching the southern coordinates, a carbon copy of the nightmare awaited. A massacre. Her loyal knights were utterly decimated. A panicked lieutenant screamed that they needed to rush to the next signal before it was too late. But Yurian's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "We stop right now. Proceeding is a death sentence." Ilya snapped her head back, calling out her betrothed's name in confusion. Yurian's eyes were deadly serious. This was no random encounter. The highly intelligent orcs were setting traps, hunting their elite squads one by one. Rushing blindly meant 0 chance of survival. He demanded they abort the mission immediately. They needed to launch a rally flare and consolidate all surviving forces defensively. Musk's face twisted in ugly rage. He barked at Yurian to shut his pathetic mouth. He accused the young master of being a cowardly amateur in warfare. He roared that their perfect formation was falling apart because of a useless punk dragging them down. Yurian's expression grew cold. His mind flashed back to the original web novel's plotline. In that story, the original hero had faced this exact same false accusation. The readers had violently cursed the author, choking on the sheer frustration of that dragging sweet potato plot. Just remembering that infuriating scene gave Yurian literary PTSD. As Musk continued to belittle his lack of battle aura, Yurian had finally had enough. "Shut your mouth." His command hit like a physical shockwave. The arrogant commander gasped, suddenly collapsing to his knees under an invisible, suffocating pressure. Ilya watched in stunned disbelief. She called out to her fiancé, sensing a completely different aura from him. Yurian looked down at the trembling knight, coldly reminding the subordinate to know his absolute place. Crushed by fear, Musk wept for mercy. Yurian simply looked down at him like he was viewing an insect. He turned his piercing gaze back to Ilya. In the original timeline, she had foolishly ignored the hero's warning. But this time, he would change her fate. Yurian stood silently, his mind racing with calculations. He told Ilya to judge the battlefield for herself. Was this really the right moment to strike? Ilya finally agreed. If she could not maintain a calm mind in this chaos, they had only one option left. They needed to call for immediate backup. It was time to fire the blue flare. A brilliant azure light pierced the heavens. The signal became a beacon visible throughout the dense forest. While Yurian rested with the group, Juranox looked at him in absolute awe. The young master was simply incredible. He had manipulated the entire battlefield, exactly according to his will. Yurian simply brushed it off. He calmly stated it was nothing special. The blacksmith assured them that reinforcements would arrive soon, but Yurian shook his head. Most of the soldiers wouldn't be coming. His eyes darkened as he thought of the true threat. That absolute monster, Karuda. The beast was likely slaughtering them as they spoke. Juranox turned to the young master, nervously asking what they were waiting for. Yurian's gaze sharpened. He declared that the real bloodbath was about to begin. Suddenly, a scout sprinted toward them. He desperately screamed out to the squad leader. He begged her to run for her life. Ilya narrowed her eyes at the sudden panic. She instantly drew her blade as a terrifying rumble shook the earth. A massive horde of heavily armed orcs emerged from the shadows. It was an overwhelming, endless army of monsters. Musk cursed under his breath at the sheer numbers. Ilya froze in shock. She bit her lip and apologized to Yurian. The guilt crushed her, believing her miscalculations had doomed them all. But Yurian remained completely unfazed. He calmly assured her that everything was fine. They were not destined to die in this forest. His fiancée looked at him in total confusion. What could he possibly do? Yurian called upon Agnes. It was time to test their 2 days of intense training. He channeled his energy to forge black iron spheres. This was the legendary 3-star ability he had just absorbed, a catastrophic power he had yet to unleash. The art of the black iron explosion. With a flick of his wrist, he hurled the dense pellet forward. It pulsed with an overwhelming, terrifying aura. The tiny sphere weakly bounced off an orc's heavy axe. The monsters erupted into mocking laughter. But then, a devastating blast consumed the entire battlefield. In a single breath, Yurian wiped out a massive chunk of the monstrous horde. He lazily waved his hand, analyzing the destructive shockwave of the blast. Agnes's fiery ability perfectly synergized with this explosive skill. Enraged, the surviving orcs roared and charged at the young master. But Yurian merely smirked. He casually launched another dark sphere into the rushing crowd. Boom! Another earth-shattering explosion painted the forest in fire and blood. Ilya stared in absolute awe. What on earth was that godlike weapon? Yurian casually explained they were black iron spheres, promising the boring details for later. But more importantly, the enemy ranks were completely shattered. Ilya's eyes burned with newfound fierce resolve. She rallied her troops with a commanding shout. Victory was suddenly within their grasp. This was their golden opportunity to crush the remaining beasts. Charging forward like a Valkyrie, Ilya gracefully isolated an enemy combatant. Her loyal subordinates fought tooth and nail to hold the line. An orc commander watched the slaughter in sheer disbelief. But suddenly, a colossal shadow fell over him. He turned to face a towering crimson menace. The commander's eyes widened in pure terror. A massive hand effortlessly crushed the orc's skull like a fragile grape. Ilya and her entire squad froze in horror. What was this monstrous entity? Its gigantic, absurdly muscular frame oozed absolute dread. The air itself grew suffocating. Yurian's eyes turned icy cold. The true boss had finally shown its face. Karuta, the legendary, bloodthirsty orc warrior from the original story. If they failed to bring down this arrogant titan today, it would be a massacre. Karuta threw back his head, unleashing an earth-shattering, demonic roar. The horrifying sound wave violently shook the soldiers to their very core. Planting his massive blade into the ground, the monster launched himself directly at Ilya. She screamed, desperately trying to dodge. But her fiancé moved faster. He snatched her waist, demanding why she froze, and violently pulled her clear just in time. Yurian warned her that one mistake meant instant death. Ilya gasped in absolute horror. The terrifying impact had instantly obliterated the soldiers caught in its blast radius. Karuta locked his beastly, bloodshot eyes on the young master. Unfazed, Yurian instantly launched a black iron sphere. The explosive orb rocketed straight toward the titan's thick neck. It detonated with devastating, fiery force. But as the smoke cleared, Karuta stood completely unharmed. He let out a mocking growl, advancing like an unstoppable juggernaut. Yurian clicked his tongue in annoyance. The blast had done absolutely zero damage. This beast possessed the ultimate warrior physique, with skin forged harder than impenetrable steel. Ilya gritted her teeth in blazing fury. How dared this monster slaughter her loyal men? A blinding, radiant sword aura erupted from her beautifully crafted blade. She vowed to carve his heart out in retaliation. Pushing her speed to the absolute limit, she charged. Her glowing blade furiously clashed against the monster's colossal weapon. A high-speed flurry of sparks illuminated the dark forest. But Karuta was a wall of iron. He casually swatted away her deadliest strikes as if playing with a child. The surviving soldiers cheered for their brilliant commander. Yurian watched intensely, just as expected from Ilya, the girl destined to become the legendary Sword Queen. Her innate traits were already ridiculously overpowered. Even in these early chapters of the story, her terrifying combat growth was truly a sight to behold. She was actually pushing Karuta backward. Her sharp aura finally pierced his defenses, drawing blood from his steel-like skin. The beast felt genuine pain for the first time. This completely shattered the monster's arrogant pride. Karuta unleashed a deafening, savage battle cry. A suffocating crimson aura violently exploded from his massive body. Ilya's breath hitched at the sheer, overwhelming pressure. Faster than lightning, Karuta swung his giant sword, forcing Ilya into a desperate, bone-crushing block. Just like the original timeline, her strength was not yet enough to conquer this boss. The brutal impact sent her flying. Her soldiers frantically rushed to her side. Coughing up blood, she admitted her bitter defeat. They had to retreat immediately if they wanted to live. But right then, Yurian calmly stepped onto the blood-soaked battlefield. The terrifying titan growled a challenge in his savage tongue. Yurian's expression remained colder than ice. He simply flipped a pitch-black dagger into a reverse grip. His eyes locked onto his prey. He launched a lightning-fast, explosive strike directly at the beast's heart. But the legendary Karuta smirked, effortlessly swatting the lethal attack away. The towering monster sneered, thinking it had effortlessly crushed the explosive dagger with a single, arrogant blow. The beast tried to mock the protagonist once more, but suddenly, confusion washed over its grotesque face. A chilling realization struck. Its heavy shoulder armor. The dark iron embers from the blast ignited, triggering a devastating chain reaction. Karuta howled in agony as the explosion ripped through its flesh, instantly crippling its massive right arm. The first strike had been a mere decoy. Karuta was so focused on the frontal assault that it completely missed the true threat lurking from behind. Its skin may have been as tough as steel, but clearly, its insides were not invincible. The fatal flaw lay within the shattered cracks of its armor, a perfect target for the protagonist's lethal precision. The mighty golem actually trembled in fear at the young master's terrifying intellect. Driven by pure, primal desperation, it charged forward like a wild beast. It launched a sweeping horizontal slash, but the protagonist gracefully slipped past the blade like flowing water. The frantic monster unleashed a flurry of strikes, yet it struck nothing but empty air. Twirling his dagger, the young martial artist coldly questioned its next move. Suddenly, another fierce explosion swallowed the monstrous creature. The protagonist smirked, noting the beast's absolute terror, declaring he would never be an easy prey. Realizing it could not win, the massive orc suddenly turned, its hateful gaze toward Juranox. It stomped heavily toward the defenseless blacksmith, while the protagonist roared for it to stop. With murderous intent, Karuta launched itself, straight at the helpless man. Cursing the sudden crisis, the protagonist instantly erupted with explosive internal energy. He had to protect the innocent. Pushing his limits, he channeled a massive torrent of chi into his supreme movement technique, the draconic treasure steps. Just as the monster's blade descended upon the blacksmith, the protagonist intercepted the blow, moving so fast he left glowing afterimages in his wake. The monstrous impact shattered the earth below, forcing Karuta to recoil in absolute shock. Ilya gasped, unable to believe her eyes. That heaven-defying speed was simply impossible. Deciding it was time to end this desperate battle, the protagonist summoned an ultimate technique, one of the 4 supreme hidden weapons of the legendary Tang Clan, the Bloody Flower, Butterfly. With a flick of his wrist, he unleashed the deadly artifact in a perfectly curved trajectory. The glowing butterfly drifted slowly toward the beast, fluttering with a deadly, breathtaking elegance. Ilya was mesmerized by the dangerously beautiful strike, while the massive orc shook with pure, paralyzing dread. It desperately tried to swat the glowing butterfly away with its giant sword, but the ethereal weapon danced around every frantic swing. Easily slipping past the beast's defenses, it gently landed upon the monster's chest. The orc unleashed a blood-curdling shriek of pure agony before a catastrophic explosion consumed it entirely. The protagonist watched the fiery display, slightly cautious of the blast radius, while Ilya stood completely frozen in awe. He hadn't been entirely certain, but pouring that much profound chi into the bloody flower butterfly was more than enough to obliterate a mighty orc warrior. The destructive power was simply overwhelming. Seeing the massive giant fall, the soldiers cheered that they had won the fierce battle. But Ilya immediately turned, declaring the war was not over yet. There was still a horde of lesser orcs roaming the field. With absolute authority, she ordered her elite vanguard to wipe them all out. Juranox bowed deeply, thanking the young master for saving his life, and the protagonist finally let out a sigh of relief, realizing his first true battle in this world had safely concluded. Later that night at the military camp, he approached Ilya, asking if she had sustained any hidden injuries. She admitted her body was aching, but owing him her very life, she had no right to complain. The protagonist smiled warmly, saying, stepping in was the right thing to do, especially after the favor she had asked of him earlier. He then revealed he didn't follow the path of the sword, but rather the supreme art of hidden weapons, leaving the proud knight completely bewildered. The protagonist nodded calmly, explaining that both the devastating explosive sphere and the graceful butterfly technique were part of his hidden martial arsenal. She stared at him in sheer disbelief. Such heaven-shaking power from mere projectiles was unimaginable. He was deeply amused, seeing how hard this truth was for her to swallow. She had lived her entire life believing the sword was the undisputed king of weapons, but tonight, her martial horizons had been forcibly shattered and expanded. Suddenly, a subordinate approached, informing the captain that the spatial magic bag was ready. Ilya nodded with fierce determination, stating they could not retrieve all their fallen comrades in the dark, but they absolutely had to claim the enemy leader's corpse. With a swift motion, she plunged her gleaming sword straight into Karuta's tough hide. Standing over the colossal beast, she marveled at its terrifying sheer size. Trying to stuff this mountain of flesh directly into the spatial bag would be completely impossible. Ilya coldly stated it had to be dismantled. This was the brutal reality of the battlefield, so there was no room for hesitation. However, with the heavy veil of night falling rapidly, it was time to retreat. As the cavalry moved out on horseback, the missing knight, Musk, finally appeared before the captain. Her eyes narrowed, demanding to know where he had been hiding. The emergency flare had been fired hours ago. Feigning confusion, the shady knight claimed his squad was ambushed by vicious orcs far from the main camp, heavily delaying their desperately needed reinforcements. Ilya listened coldly, piercing him with a sharp glare as she asked where the rest of his men were. Only 2 cowards had returned. Musk faked a tragic sigh, claiming his squad was wiped out by overwhelming orc forces. But the perceptive captain was not fooled for a second. She fiercely demanded to inspect the fallen bodies, ordering him to bring the corpses immediately. Sweating profusely, the treacherous knight frantically tried to change the subject, taking cautious steps toward her. He interrupted Ilya's commanding aura. He smoothly insisted on explaining their tactical positions first, moving closer and closer, until he suddenly drew a hidden, venomous dagger, lunging for a fatal strike against Ilya. But the protagonist's reflexes were like lightning. With a ruthless counterattack, Musk was slammed hard into the dirt. The young master scoffed, pointing out the traitor's fatal flaw. He claimed to have fought a bloody battle against orcs, yet his armor didn't bear a single drop of green blood. It was undeniably clear. He was a filthy spy collaborating with the monsters, leaking their tactical roots from the very beginning. Trembling, Musk gasped, demanding to know how they saw through his flawless disguise. Ilya furiously drew, her gleaming blade, her eyes burning with the cold wrath of a betrayed commander. The pathetic traitor pleaded for his life, screaming that the Malone family had centuries of glorious achievements serving the prestigious Marcus household. But Ilya's expression remained as cold as a blizzard, dismissing his excuses as absolute garbage. With a flash of silver, she silenced his lies forever. And so, the bloody night. The story continues. Inside the grand, noble residence of Asu Castle, Geranox gently roused the young master from his slumber. Yurian slowly sat up, wondering what was so urgent. The blacksmith chuckled, noting it was already near midday. Furthermore, Captain Elliot had arrived for a visit. Suddenly, the young lady appeared, adorned in an elegant black dress. She softly asked if her fiancé had rested well. The protagonist was caught completely off guard, stunned by her breathtaking attire. Ilya explained that Yurian needed to visit her family's estate. Her father, the Marquis, had formally commanded her to escort him there personally, and she gently asked if he would accompany her. Seeing her up close, the protagonist realized that calling her the most beautiful woman in the world was absolutely no exaggeration. Without hesitation, he agreed. A small smile graced Ilya's lips as she promised to wait outside, giving him time to prepare for their journey. Yurian took a moment to analyze the situation. He noticed her affection rating had been steadily climbing ever since he stepped in to save her life. Stepping outdoors, the protagonist called out to Ilya, politely apologizing for the delay. The surrounding townsfolk were passionately cheering for their iron-blooded knight, Lady Ilya. They praised her for single-handedly slaying the ferocious orc warrior, showering her with absolute glory. Yurian understood the true weight of that title. It was forged from her unyielding spirit, refusing to surrender even when staring death in the face, exactly like in the original novel. But then, the crowd's cheers shifted to him. They roared for Lord Yurian, the legendary Iron Mage, marveling at his striking good looks. The protagonist blinked in utter confusion. He figured these dramatic nicknames must have spread like wildfire through the exaggerated testimonies of the surviving soldiers. They had likely seen him, manipulating those levitating metal spheres, and completely misunderstood him as a powerful mage. His thoughts were interrupted as Ilya softly called his name. She hesitated before speaking, admitting she had already said it. but she wanted to express her deepest gratitude for saving her life twice. The protagonist waved it off, declaring it was only the natural thing to do. The girl's expression darkened. She revealed that, at the break of dawn, she had visited the blood-soaked forest to recover the fallen from that nightmarish battlefield. It was utterly soul-crushing to see her comrades scattered across the cold earth. In that moment of sorrow, a chilling realization hit her. If it had not been for his miraculous intervention the day before, she and her entire squad would have shared that exact tragic fate. The protagonist lowered his gaze, lost in heavy thought. Suddenly, Ilya's eyes blazed with fierce determination. She swore she would train, relentlessly, and forge herself into an unstoppable force. She vowed to surpass every limit, standing at the absolute pinnacle, and never taste the bitter ash of defeat again. As Yurian marveled at how her legendary talent was finally blooming, the family mages activated a shimmering portal to the Marcus domain. Ilya explained that because the distance was relatively short, her father had deployed their personal spellcasters. Stepping into the magical circle, they stood side by side. The mages began their mystical chants, and with a blinding flash of arcane energy, the teleportation sequence activated. Yurian and Geronox gasped in pure astonishment at the spectacle. Ilya softly noted that it had been quite a long time since his last visit to her family's lands. The protagonist was completely dizzy, his vision spinning as the world shifted in the blink of an eye. Still reeling from the spatial distortion, Geronox stared in awe, wondering aloud if all noble bloodlines lived in such unimaginably massive palaces. Regardless of the overwhelming luxury, the action's height, the protagonist was immediately summoned to a grand banquet. He remembered that in the original novel, the tragic main character had suffered through eating bland ration soup in the Marquis domain day after day. But finally, his moment had arrived to savor high-class noble cuisine. The mighty Marquis warmly welcomed his future son-in-law, instructing Yurian not to bother with a formal bow. He insisted the young man simply sit down, tossing aside all stiff formalities. Accepting the gracious offer, the young master took his seat directly across from the breathtaking Ilya. Lord Marcus locked eyes with him, his voice heavy with sincerity, stating that before she was a fiancée, she was his precious daughter, and as a father, he was eternally indebted to Yurian for saving her life. The protagonist humbly lowered his head, replying that it was merely something he was destined to do. Then, the grand feast was served. The protagonist practically held his breath, waiting for the culinary masterpiece to be uncovered. But to his absolute horror, it was the Marcus H family's notorious special Chiren soup. The Marquis proudly boasted that, much like the Rox family, they held their own sacred recipe, carrying on the proud tradition of consuming this miserable battle ration after a harsh war. He enthusiastically urged the boy to dig in, while a suffering Yurian forced a painful smile, thanking him and trying to convince his taste buds to endure the ultimate trial. Suddenly, breaking the silence of the meal, the Marquis dropped a bombshell, directly asking when the two of them planned to marry. The protagonist choked in pure shock. The Marquis leaned in, a serious aura radiating from him as he spoke of his daughter's future. Yurian's mind raced, realizing this had to be a high-stakes psychological test. The Marquis undoubtedly still looked down on him, considering the old man's affection level was still at -10, even after the rescue. Steeling his nerves, the young man boldly declared he would marry her this very instant if he had the power to do so. Ilya's face instantly flushed crimson at the aggressive confession. The protagonist pushed forward, explaining that currently, he had not yet secured his position as the family heir, and his trash-like reputation made the entire world look down upon him in disgust. To truly be worthy of standing beside Ilya, he swore he would forge a new destiny, and only once he seized the title of heir would he proudly take her as his wife. The Marquis narrowed his eyes, releasing a heavy pressure as he questioned if the boy truly believed this was possible. He noted that he had heard his younger brother was heralded as an absolute genius of the generation. Did Yurian honestly believe he could shatter that gap, defeat the prodigy, and claim the throne? With unshakable resolve, Yurian declared that victory was an absolute certainty. The Marquis erupted into booming laughter, his aura softening as he admitted the boy truly had undergone a legendary transformation, just as the wild rumors claimed. He promised to throw his full support behind the young man. However, his expression grew serious once more as he revealed that just before Yurian's arrival, an urgent magical transmission had arrived from Wellington. News of his incredible exploits had already reached the Rox family's ears, and they had urgently contacted the Marquis via a magic communication orb. The protagonist's heart skipped a beat as he questioned what his stern father had said. The Marquis calmly waved it off, suggesting they finish their meal before connecting to the call. The protagonist offered a polite nod of gratitude, stealing a glance at Ilya as she silently ate. He couldn't help but wonder why her mood had suddenly plummeted yet again. Regardless of her mysterious shift in attitude, it appeared he had successfully conquered this deadly social trial and left a stellar impression on Lord Marcus. Later, in a private chamber, the magical transmission commenced. A skilled family mage activated the shimmering artifact, instantly linking to the Rock's household and projecting the intimidating hologram of the terrifying family head. The protagonist braced himself, fully aware that this was the magical projection shimmered in the air, connecting him across the distance. The young man bowed his head, asking for his father's forgiveness, while the patriarch on the other side cursed him for being a foolish brat. Yet beneath the roaring anger, parental concern leaked through. He quickly asked if his son was injured, but our main character shook his head. Wellington swiftly shifted the topic. He demanded to know the truth. Was it real? Had his son truly saved Ilya and slain a brutal orc warrior? The main character smiled humbly, claiming it was merely a stroke of luck. His father nodded knowingly. The patriarch declared he would hear the full battle report. Upon his return, he pressed to know when his son would finally come home. The young master calculated his plans, promising to return the day after tomorrow. His father issued a strict command. He must bring his brother back with him. This unexpected order left our hero completely stunned. The Marquis stepped in, suggesting the young master should depart at dawn tomorrow. However, he generously offered him to stay and rest for a few more days. The young master smiled warmly, admitting he truly wished he could linger. But duty called. His father's strict task awaited him. The Marquis sighed in disappointment, but graciously offered to open a high-tier magic portal to ensure a comfortable journey. The young master let out a quiet sigh. Despite his deep gratitude, he firmly rejected the generous offer. He was currently at a crucial bottleneck in his cultivation. To break through, he needed to temper his body through rigorous travel. Relying on a teleportation gate would only dull his growing senses. The Marquis looked at him in absolute awe. The boy had truly been reborn into a completely different person. Anticipation burned in the nobleman's eyes, eager to witness what heights of power the young master would reach. Our main character bowed in profound thanks. Hearing his disciplined resolve, Ilya flashed a breathtaking, heart-fluttering smile. The young master chuckled inwardly, knowing his growth had deeply impressed her. Stepping outside, the main character's eyes narrowed sharply. There was a hidden reason he had rejected the Marquis's teleportation magic. Yurian, his loyal blacksmith companion, pointed out that the road to the capital lay in the exact opposite direction. Hadn't the young master sworn they were heading straight there? With a mysterious smirk, our hero announced a sudden change of plans. They needed to make a crucial detour first. He pointed toward a colossal, imposing mountain near the estate. It was a legendary zone known as the Dragon's Clearing. Yurian tilted his head in sheer confusion. Why visit such a barren place before returning to the forge? He carefully asked if his young lord intended to make a foolish wish to the ancient spirits. But our main character scoffed at the idea. He wasn't there to beg for favors. He was there to claim a hidden divine treasure, a supreme artifact, destined to be found by the novel's original hero far in the future. Now, he was snatching fate into his own hands. They trekked deep into the rugged terrain, the massive cavern known as the Dragon's Clearing was said to be the ancient nesting ground of mythical beasts. His loyal subordinates scanned the area. Despite the early dawn hour, the mountain was swarming with hopeful travelers. He whispered nervously. Could a divine treasure truly be hidden among such a massive crowd? But our hero just smirked, declaring the public rumors were completely fake. This world was overflowing, with hidden truths meant only for the chosen. He commanded Yurian to follow closely. The loyal blacksmith swallowed his doubts and nodded. As they bypassed the crowded front of the mountain peak, they arrived at a desolate cliffside. The blacksmith gasped for breath, staring blankly at the solid rock wall and complaining it was a dead end. But our main character simply smiled. He stepped forward, wondering if his systemic creation had worked. Before him lay an invisible entrance, absurdly shaped exactly like a modern car door. He sharply scanned their surroundings, ensuring no prying eyes were lurking nearby. Confirming they were totally alone, our hero reached out to pull the invisible handle. Instantly, the fabric of reality warped. They watched in absolute shock as the spectral door materialized. and swung wide open right into the solid stone. Juranox's jaw dropped to the floor, screaming that such magic defied all logic, but the main character ignored the impossible physics, confidently commanding them to step inside the dimensional rift. As soon as they crossed the threshold, the solid rock sealed shut behind them. The blacksmith blinked his eyes, utterly bewildered by the glowing luminescence. It was far brighter than he had ever expected from a sealed cave. The walls were embedded with radiant, pulsating gemstones, but as Juranox reached out, the young master snapped a fierce warning. Touching it would trigger a lethal mechanism. Juranox pulled his hand back in sheer terror, stammering to ask what kind of deadly trap awaited them. With a chilling calmness, our hero revealed that the slightest mistake would instantly transform the entire space into a roaring sea of inescapable hellfire. The ancient domain was heavily rigged with fatal formations. He ordered his companion to step exactly where he stepped. Trembling, the blacksmith obeyed without a single word. Together, they navigated the deadly maze, eventually stopping before a majestic, ancient altar. Juranox marveled at its grand design, but frowned when he noticed the surface was completely empty. The main character chuckled darkly. He asked if his companion had any idea what was buried beneath the illusions. The public, dragon's clearing outside, was merely a decoy, and right behind this very wall, he could sense the teeming auras of the ignorant masses. Right now, those fools were unknowingly praying in the direction of our two trespassers. Shaking his head at the irony, the main character decided it was time to claim his rightful spoils. He reached beneath the stone altar, pressing a hidden runic switch. With a heavy rumble, the secret entrance cracked open. Juranox gasped, declaring the sight to be absolutely unbelievable. Inside lay 3 massive, bulging bags of pure gold coins, but the young master ignored the superficial wealth, snatching up a small, ornate wooden box. This was the true prize, far more valuable than a mountain of gold. Inside rested the legendary warrior's jade, an artifact possessing a divine rebirth effect, absolutely essential for shattering his cultivation limits. Stashing the loot, they swiftly moved out of the treacherous cavern. Juranox turned to his master, asking what their next move would be. The young master's eyes gleamed with purpose. Their next destination was the Grand Magic Tower in Jiasu Castle. The blacksmith wiped his sweat, amazed that the devout crowds outside were still blindly praying to the empty mountain. Suddenly, a spine-chilling sensation washed over the young master. He instantly detected a calm, yet utterly overwhelming spiritual pressure. A mysterious woman stood among the crowd. Without hesitation, he activated his supreme skill, the Creator's Eye, to analyze her stats, but to his absolute horror, nothing happened. The main character froze in cold sweat. According to the original novel's timeline, this terrifying entity wasn't supposed to appear yet. Juranox noticed his master's pale face, nervously asking what was wrong, but our hero couldn't even speak. He was too busy questioning how her monstrous aura could be so suffocatingly powerful. Every alarm in his mind was screaming. This mysterious woman was an unfathomable existence he absolutely could not defeat at his current level.